You went for the CEO role twice.
So I lost, and I hate losing. And one of them got sick of me asking, and he just said, Chris, they did not choose you. That's the answer. So stop looking for it.
Did you have imposter syndrome?
Well, some days you go, there's quite a big call to make here. Our stores are getting attacked by groups of people going, Armageddon's coming.
Were you getting regular phone calls from Dame Jacinda Ardern?
Never met or spoken to Jacinda Ardern.
Really?
Yeah. Would it have been valuable? I think so. Someone else was not off mute and went, for fuck's sake, really loudly. And you've never had 1,000 people laughing on an audio call. It was the stress reliever that everyone needed. My dad said, if you pass a drunk in the street and they say you're ugly, are you ugly or are they just drunk?
Are you proud of yourself?
I struggle with the word, that line between pride and arrogance. If anyone ever said to me you're arrogant, I'd be really upset.
When the time comes that you pass away, what 3 words would you like family to say about you?
Being a good parent, being someone who cared about people, someone who did okay in life and then used that to do well for others.
Oh, good, you're here. Come on. This is the centre of performance. Whenever there's a top performance in New Zealand, it all comes from here. That's Lisa Carrington. She's been doing that for days. That's the boy who got the hole-in-one in Tokyo. Oh, he did it again. Hey, Finn, how's the performance going?
Top tier.
Nice. This is our Generate room. In here, you'll find our top performers helping Kiwis maximise their KiwiSaver investments. Get in here, Finn. Maximise.
Right,
Generate. Putting performance first.
Chris Quin, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you, kia ora. It's great to be here. This will be fascinating.
Why will it be fascinating?
Well, I've been listening to a few, and as I said to you, I'm not sure all these famous people have been here, so I'm fascinated by this and what the questions will be.
Oh no, well, it's an honour to have you here. CEO of Foodstuffs, North Island?
Yes,
New Zealand.
that's right.
North Island.
North Island.
10 billion in turnover, 24,000 staff, 400 plus stores. Do you know exactly how many stores there are of each brand?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, New World.
New World, there is 156.
Should be 157, mate. I live just around the corner. The whole team want to know, when is the rebuild happening?
The rebuild of Vic Park, yes. Look, what a tragedy that was. I was in a building in town on the day and, man, saw the smoke rising and you think, what is going on there? And then your phone goes nuts and it's all on. So incredibly sad because there's so many people I meet who go, that was my pantry, that was my place. So we're well into design, site's cleared, we're building at 6-star green, which means there's a few processes you need to make sure everything's cleaned up and done properly. I really, really hope Christmas 27 that will be open and trading.
Yeah.
And
it was my. It's funny that you say it's. People called it their pantry because I live in the apartments just next to it, and it's people in the building call it either the pantry or the wine fridge.
Yes.
But I want to know, did all the staff there that wanted jobs find jobs elsewhere in the company?
Yeah, look, it took a little while, but we basically were able to land a plan for everybody. So lucky that Point Chevalier was well underway in terms of the build, so the timing of getting the team in there was just really good luck. But that's the thing about the co-op, with all the individually family-owned stores, is they all went, can we help? And look, I need a butcher, a baker, I could do with another checkout person, whatever it was. And they just pitched in, and we work out of the people team in the centre, working with the stores, and we managed to land a plan. There was a few for whom, look, that site doesn't work for where I live, or that shift doesn't, so there was always a little bit of complexity. But, I'm really proud of how the cooperative got together and made that happen.
You got 24,000 staff under you in the company. I don't know if you know specifics, but Karen, who was the barista there, you don't know what happened to her?
I don't know exactly, but if she was a great barista in the middle of town in Auckland, she would have been fine.
Mate, she was wonderful, and she was at the front of my mind when the fire happened, and it became apparent just how bad it was because I'd see her every morning for my coffee, and I could tell just how much she loved working with those people at that store. Yeah,
they were a great, tight team, as happens in many, many stores, but, it's just something about that fully customer-facing, hard-working, doing a great job, the energy in it, and that's, having an owner in the store really builds that culture. That's what, we see that a lot.
PAK'nSAVE is another one of Foodstuff stores. How many PAK'nSAVE stores are there?
There are 46.
4 squares?
About 165.
Gilmore's?
8.
And Liquorland?
Oh, North Island, about 80.
Right.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything, or is that all under the Foodstuffs umbrella?
You've got that's the brands. That's what faces our customers. Yeah. So that's who it is. Quite often people go, oh yeah, that Woolworths of yours. And you go, no, that's not ours.
Is that a dirty word?
You need to call Australia on that one.
I'm surprised you know the exact number of stores for each of the brands. That's quite in the weeds.
Yeah, it's important, right? We love it when we open a new one. Sometimes, particularly in Foursquare, we've had a bit of change of stores and location. So it's just one of those things that, you talk about a bit so you get to know.
Mm. The one question everyone wanted me to put to you is, can you give us your best stickman impression?
If you ring my voicemail, you'll get a very good stickman impression.
Did you get
because
Paul
the stickman did it? Yeah, Paul did that back when I started. So, no, I'm not very good at that.
Just it's a meat week at PAK'nSAVE?
It's a meat week at PAK'nSAVE. See, that's why they don't get me to do it. It's terrible.
That's the moment that your PA asks us to cut out of the podcast. So,
she'd leave it in.
Beyond the title, who is Chris Quin?
Oh, look, I've sometimes when I stand up and, you talk to groups or people ask that, I go, well, I'm a boy from Lower Hutt. Born in Auckland, but left before I think I was 2. So I don't really, remember that piece. My dad was a health inspector for the government, so there was a bit of relocation. So we were in Hawke's Bay for about 8 years. And then Lower Hutt. If you said, where are you from? I'd go Lower Hutt. Wellington is where I grew up. And went to school and secondary school and university. So that's sort of, that's where it starts.
Mm. Yeah. In researching this, I learned a bit about your parents. You lost them both painfully young, right?
Yeah. It was, my dad was 50, I was 21, and my mum at 60. So, yeah, very young. I'm the oldest of 3. So, yeah, it was particularly with Dad going, I think my brother, who is a bit younger than me, he was 11 when he passed. So, yeah, it was it's a massive impact on any family when that happens. And you learn so much about, your role as oldest. You learn a lot about who your father was because I'm trying to remember, he passed on the 27th of December, which, a terrible time of year. And so his funeral was not long after that, and it's a time where a lot of people are away normally. And 600 or 700 people showed up, and you sort of go, as a 21-year-old, your dad, Dad's never a hero at 21, right? Everyone thinks they know more, and you sort of go, wow, this is a whole new side, and I didn't understand all of that story. So, really impactful. And my mum was breast cancer. She was cleared for 7 years, then it came back. So,
what was the cause of death for your dad?
Was an aneurysm, a stroke.
Right.
So he was
quite sudden.
A big man and a heavy smoker. One of the things I've never done is smoke.
What impact did that have on you? I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes. Like at that age, I probably thought I knew everything. So it probably wouldn't be for me until I got a bit older that I'd understand the impact of it. Yeah,
that's what they say. Hire a teenager while they still know everything. Yeah, look, it was, obviously incredibly tough on my mum. With 3 kids, at 21 you're an adult, but, with 3 kids, I probably, I remember I went through a bit of a phase of checking out. I just, you get away from the situation and, probably had some fun, but probably also, caused a bit of havoc. And, you'd go through a bit of an adjustment phase and then sort of grow up a little bit and come back. So it was, one of the most impactful things, and it sort of stuck in my mind, was the year he passed. So in a single calendar year, he had my 21st, his 50th, and passed. I had the same year. So my son, 21, I turned 50, and, it sort of weighs on your mind a bit. You're going, obviously the last bit didn't happen. Yeah,
it must have been playing on your mind quite deeply. Like you must have seen your son at 21 and think, shit, fuck, it's young to lose your dad. To lose a parent.
Yeah.
You've probably never had comparisons in your life to Brad Thorne. But
correct.
I had Brad Thorne in for a podcast last week, and he lost his dad when he was 19. His dad was his biggest fan, biggest cheerleader, biggest confidant, and his dad got to see him play 7 games for the Broncos out of his 500-game career. Do you? Your parents missed out on a lot.
Yeah, and so did I, because of, and so did my kids, because no grandparents on my side. My son, who's 29 now, would have been, I think it was 3 when my mum passed, so...
you don't really have any memories, eh?
Yeah, and I do remember my wife Sue was pregnant with our daughter, and she told her what that it was a girl, hadn't told me, but told her before she passed, which was just one of those things that, was really cool and really important that she did. But yeah, my dad wasn't a sports guy, and I probably, I was no sports hero. I was probably 4th, 15 at school.
St. Pat's Silverstream, that's a competitive school. Just his thing was debating and speaking, and he was a teacher essentially. He'd been in a profession, then started to teach the profession. And that was one thing, we had oratory and debating contests at the school, and, entered every year, finished 2nd or 3rd every year. I remember the very last year, so what's that, 7th form, what do they call it now, year 13? I wasn't going to do it. I'd said, I'm sick of being second, I'm not doing it. And he pushed me hard to do it. We won it because, he coached me through it. And, I just sort of think back, doesn't matter what you're participating in, it's about an attitude that you just keep having a go. And he was determined. Any other lessons from your parents that sort of stand out? Things that you sort of find you chirping in your head from time to time?
Look, one of the things my dad used to say was never have to cross the road. And it was about relationships with people. So it was sort of, it was don't ever leave something in a situation where if you saw that person walking towards you, you'd feel like you had to get out of the way or not bump into them. It's just such a simple thing to think about. And particularly as you go through a career where you come into lots and lots of people with lots and lots of opinions and, sort of all sorts of views on the world and that stuff, you just keep thinking about that. How can I leave this where I don't have to cross the road?
I've never heard that before. That's really good.
Yeah,
so it's like a preventative measure.
Yeah, I love
just don't let things get that bad.
Yeah, or at least be in a position where you go, I've done the right thing. Whether they have or not, that's in their hands. But, and I love the simplicity of it. You can remember it. So,
how are your kids now? You're an empty nester?
Yes, yeah, we are.
Your daughter's an embryologist?
Yes, she is. So Eilish. This comes from being married to a preschool teacher, so when you name kids, you have to choose names she hasn't hated.
What are the bad names?
Well, there were a lot by the time we got to that. But so she is a clinical embryologist. She's in Melbourne in a fertility clinic. Incredibly proud, went from a kid that needed a little bit of help in the middle of her school years to, a master's in clinical embryology, which... it's the thing that sticks in my mind about that is at a point in her college time, a teacher found her magic, clicked with her and turned her on to science and, away she went. She's, and what I love about so many kids I meet now, and I'm very fortunate mine are this, is they are doing a job that has a purpose, that they love, that they're, engaged and entertained by, and it's so cool.
Yeah, that's one thing that stood out to me because myself and my ex-wife, we went through the fertility treatment and IVF program and ICSI and donor sperm and all that. And the embryologists, they do a phenomenal job.
Yeah, they do.
And it's important work too.
She genuinely thinks about it as I'm trying to help people have families who couldn't. It's always a little bit disturbing when you ring your daughter and she's, I can't talk, I'm analysing sperm.
The way they talk, they get, this isn't your daughter specifically, but the embryologist I dealt with, they'd give you a personal phone call saying, we've got some really good looking sperm here. Yes. It's got a great head, a great tail.
Yeah, of course.
And what about your son? Something to do with robotics?
Yeah, so Callum, my son's 29, and he is a mechatronics engineer was the qualification. We wouldn't have heard of it. And I think when he started it at Auckland Uni, it was probably only 2 years old as a degree, so it was quite a fresh thing. And I think in New Zealand, only Auckland and Canterbury teach it at this point. But it's a combination of mechanical engineering, robotics, computer engineering, AI, all of those things, which you sort of look at it and go, if there was ever a degree for the future, it's right there. He loved it, a 4-year degree at Auckland, and then has been with Zuru ever since, with the Mowbray brothers in their business all over the world, doing some really cool things.
Incredible. So for you, what does an average day look like? I think you've been on, as far as I'm aware, like one other podcast, and you talked about swimming at 5 a.m. with waterproof earplugs in.
Oh,
Are you still in your swimming era?
No, that happened after a small incident on a mountain bike.
Broken leg at Motutapu.
Yeah. No, it wasn't Motutapu. That would have been really exciting. No, I've done Motutapu, but not that one. It was a different place and ride, but I broke a leg in 9 places. So the recovery included how do you get moving again, and swimming's fantastic for that. So that was a little while Foodstuffs was still in its 60-year-old building in Mount Roskill. I'd go to the Mount Roskill pools in the morning. But no, now, a typical day, I'd most, 3-4 days a week, if I'm doing good, I get to a gym class about 6:30 in the morning. It's fantastic. It's a BFT, so it's a
45-minute
class, 45-minute thing. And it's in Mangere, and I love being there and love being the crowd. I'm possibly the only white guy in the room, and that's fantastic. And it's such a great crew of people who there's no sort of heroes. You don't feel like I have to be an endurance athlete to be here. And they're all just having a good time and supporting each other, and it's a nice, cool way to start the day. Then it's, our offices are by the airport at the landing now, which is an incredible part of Auckland in terms of the build-out of businesses there. And it's into it. Every morning, my leadership team and I, we have a thing we call Heartbeat. So we just, on a call at 8:30, just going, has anything happened safety-wise overnight? Because we run a big physical operation, a lot of stores, a lot of people. Then what's happening with retailing, what's happening with wholesaling, and then any issues, because for me, that's a lot about how fast things, every 24 hours we're together, we can make decisions, we can move things along, we can trade. So that's how the day starts.
Starting the day with exercise, it's a win, isn't it? You must have to get up really early, though. You live like half an hour away from where you work.
Yeah, it's about a 5 a.m. alarm.
Right.
Yep. And your body clock, it lets you down right, because on the day you go, you know what, I'm just not feeling I'm going to sleep in. Doesn't happen. So, and I don't know how it does it, but Saturday mornings it doesn't. So But no, it's a feel-good way to start the day.
Yeah. What time are you normally in bed?
About midnight.
Oh, my God, really?
Yeah.
What, are you reading documents, doing work?
Working a bit. I'm trying to be, and it's absolutely true, and I'm trying to be more disciplined about cutting the blue light an hour before sleep, and just read or, do something hard copy. But yeah, that's usually about it.
It's tough though, isn't it? Because in a job like yours, there must just always be stuff you can do. You're always behind.
Yeah. Demand always exceeds supply. It's just... And one of the best questions you could be asking yourself is sort of, what is this, what's the output of this? Why are we doing this? Or are we just doing? Because being busy is not hard. Being impactful, that's the real question.
How did you end up chairman of the board of Giltrap? Don't you have enough on your plate? Are you no good at saying no?
Come to that. Look, one of the things, I've never worked outside of New Zealand, travelled heaps, but never worked outside of New Zealand. I have a real passion for New Zealanders. I just think there's something about what we do where we punch above our weight in the world. And there's so many stories about that. So you look around and you see great New Zealand stories. It's why I sat on the board of the Ice House for a long time. And look, cars is a personal passion, but also the Giltrap family business. Sir Colin started that in 1966. And his sons now own and run the business. It's another great New Zealand story. And I know the sons, and it was just one of these classic New Zealand moments. I was in a coffee shop in their building. One of them walked past. We had a chat about something else I was looking at, and he said, "Oh, are you looking for a board seat?" And I said, "Well, I am, because I believe CEOs should have one outside of their job, because I think it just keeps your mind open." And he said, "Oh, well, we're looking for a director." And that was it. And a couple of years as director, then, as Colin became not working on the board, it just happened.
How did that conversation go down with your wife?
She just, eye roll, and then worried about how many I was going to buy, I think.
But there's quite a bit of work involved with those things. I sort of had no idea, but I had Dame Joan Withers in for a podcast last week, and she's like a serial board member or board chair. Yeah. She was explaining to me like the 300-page documents that she's got to read before these meetings and the due diligence involved. Like it's not just rock in and wing it, is it? No,
I think the old days, and without any offence to anyone, of lawyers and accountants sort of turning up and, having lunch and saying, well done, that's long gone. Directors' responsibilities are serious, and so they should be. Yeah. You are there on behalf of the shareholders, protecting their interests, and if you're not doing that, that's not responsible. So I know Dame Joan and others, very experienced, very capable directors and governors and chairs. It's great I personally find it great to be a CEO in one world and a chairman in another, because I can sometimes see how bad I am at either. But it's certainly, going, oh yeah, I was a real dick about that. And so it does teach you the difference between governance and management, and to respect both roles and to try and play your role really, really well.
What sort of, can you think of any examples of things that you've been a real dick about? I mean, you've been really successful in your corporate career.
Look, there are plenty of, along the way you go, I made that mistake, and quite often it's about people situations where sometimes you go, I just really believe in the person. I really think they can turn this around, or they can be different. Quite often the respectful thing to do is to call it and say, look, let's get you somewhere where you can be successful, but it's not there. And be brave about that. I think that's quite often. Sometimes when you're right, there's a great saying that said the most important capability about leadership is you never stop learning. And leaders that turn up and go, good news, I know everything, that's not helpful. And and I can think of moments where you've gone, I'm just going in to start giving my view or issuing a decision without learning. That's when you get it wrong.
Well, I've sort of found, not just leadership specific, but in my life, like the older I get and the more I know, I realise the more I have to learn.
Yeah. And isn't that wonderful?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. 20, I thought I knew it all.
Yes. Yeah.
I look back now, I cringe. I pity that kid.
Yeah. But that, also you've got to have that energy, don't you? And you've got to, as long as you don't break anything, you just bump your way down the hallway and keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're recording this podcast just to timestamp it in the middle of February 2026, and I was preparing for the chat yesterday, and as I was doing so, I got a pop-up on my phone. The headline was, New Zealand food prices recently had their biggest monthly rise in 4 years. When there's a headline like that, which is quite frequently, and you're part of the news cycle, what do you feel?
Look, you're firstly very aware that 4 million times a week New Zealanders shop in our stores or on our websites or online. So, you think about our 24,000 people, they get a lot of commentary, a lot of pokes, a lot of questions, a lot of, semi-attacks from everywhere.
Oh, when the front line.
Yeah, they are the front line. In fact, an economist in Australia we worked with said it perfectly. He said, you guys are not the cause of inflation, but you're on the front line of inflation. And I thought it was just such a simple way to think about it. So the first thing is, if you are truly committed to being a customer organisation, you've got to go, that is a problem for every New Zealand household. Like, don't start defending yourself. You've got to go first. That's a real problem for New Zealand households. It is tough out there. We have 24,000 families in our care. We know a lot about what life is like for them, and everything about the household bill, the insurance, the rates, the electricity, food, it's all had a lot of pressure in the last few years. So that's the first thing, is you go accept and own that it is a problem for your customers and you need to care about it. Secondly, then you go, okay, first thing would be good is make sure we understand what has happened and why and where it's come from. And that's been a piece that we've been doing for a while that we believe is only one in the world, because we've travelled a lot and shared it with other retailers and no one else has done it. But we've been publishing for over 3 years simply how much has our price gone up by, how much has the cost of the products from our suppliers gone up by, and what's happened to food price inflation overall in the market. And on average, we have been the lowest of those three. So the first job you do is say, are you making a difference? Like, we're doing everything we can to keep prices fair and valuable. So we do, and love that we've got a PAK'nSAVE story that plays really strong into that. And look at all the time what's happening with the price increases coming from our suppliers. And I think, it was even, that story played through to radio this morning. And, a good part of the commentary was, hey, look, red meat, our products are in demand all over the world. That's fantastic, but we pay the same price the world pays. Dairy is the same. Chocolate's gone through the roof because cocoa's, had huge price increases from all over the world. So partners of ours like Whittaker's just have to go, look, we've got to keep making the same quality, which means we're going to have to put the price up. So that's, you then go into that, and then you start thinking about how can we help our customers with this problem. So how do we provide as much advice as we can about how you buy in season, how you buy fresh stuff, when it's in good supply rather than when it's rare. How do we keep finding alternatives? And that's a real balance. Do you bring in a global product or use the local one? Where does the value sit in that? So it's, it's a complex supply chain with a lot going on. and we're accountable for being transparent about what our prices are doing, which we've tried to do.
Mm. You mentioned it was on the radio this morning. I heard the same chat. I was driving to the gym at maybe about 6:30, and Mike Hosking was speaking to someone about it. The media does tend to paint you as not you specifically, but I suppose Foodstuffs and Woolworths as the bad guys. Are you the bad guys?
Look, no, we're not the bad guys, Now, the media are reflecting a mood of their readers and of consumers, and also a lot of where the politics is at on these subjects. And all over the world, cost of living has been a major issue since COVID, basically. And so, it's reflected everywhere. I landed in Ireland late October last year. And first breakfast I went to in the hotel, the Irish Times is on the table. On the front cover, it says food prices going up for Christmas. And part of me went, well, it's not just us. But so this is a global problem, and it is caused by what's going on in inflation globally. And if there was one word every New Zealander has heard in the last few years, it's inflation. Yeah. And one word they've felt on their households, it's inflation. Some of the conversations shifting from, is this a cost problem or is it a productivity and income problem? Because, should we be trying to focus on how we grow a country where our jobs are more valuable, where people are paid more? But at the end of the day, the fundamental issue is I should be able to, if I'm doing a decent job, earning a decent salary, I should be able to have a decent life. And we've got to look at everything that affects that and make a difference. Are we the bad guys? Look, that question really goes to, are we making profit more than we should be in a fair market? And, we did a simple thing for a few years now. We said, if you pay $1 in store, our profit after tax is 3.6 cents. And that's, and I think it's one of the things not many people know about is how big a business a supermarket is. If you look at a PAK'nSAVE, we're talking about 400 plus staff. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars of investment in equipment and building and stock and all of those things. We're talking about, a dozen or so leaders of that business. We're talking about, each week, hundreds of thousands of cartons of product moving through. It's a decent sized business. Making 3.6 cents after paying tax is fair, compares pretty well to the rest of the world. It is not out of whack.
Does it make you happy when the banks are in the firing line and not you?
No. Look, it's a short game if you go long as someone else has been kicked harder, we're okay. Yeah. We want our customers to be happy with what we do.
Yeah.
I truly believe I've been around this organisation 10 years. As you probably know, I was in Telecom and Spark before that, so I've had a fun time with brands through my whole career because there were times where they were hated too. And when you look back at it, the real issue is how do we get New Zealanders to be, one, comfortable that what they are getting from New Zealand companies is good and fair? Because we compare our retail offerings out of our brands to many in the world, and I think we can genuinely say they're as good as some of the world's best. And your store visit, we've got people coming down to see it. So that's, it's a long flight, and you think, why would they do that? I think the other thing is, New Zealand's at a really interesting moment, and this thing keeps going through my head, which is it's really hard to build something up while you're punching down. And there's a lot of societal and political punching down going on. We need to be focused on building something up.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I've been fortunate enough to have quite a few successful entrepreneurs on the podcast. Actually, probably the big three of New Zealand: Anna Mowbray, Sir Peter Beck, and Sir Rod Drury. And they all have the same thing in common: that same sort of attitude about we need to think better and we need to be more positive. Build bigger tables, not bigger walls to keep people away from the table. But these when you're required to front up for these interviews on a personal level, like how do you feel? You get anxious? Sleepless nights the night before?
Don't get anxious or sleepless, no. You think about, one of the things I keep thinking about is how do you build connection? I think it's one of the critical leadership things. So, because you do see some leaders talk in a language or a style that, I keep thinking about who's listening or who am I talking to and how do I respectfully connect with them and sort of... And the other thing I think about is, if the question gets asked, answer yes or no. Like just keep it real, keep it authentic. And also, sometimes there's great power in saying, I don't know. because, there's a vulnerability in that I think I respect in people when they just go, I don't know, I'm not going to even try and make it up. But also, I do feel like part of my job is to do something on behalf of our team so that someone stands up for them. Because that's one of the things about all of this noise about the supermarket industry. It's incredibly hard for a 16-year-old on checkout. And one of the things I love about our business is so many, like the number of people you meet who said my after-school job was New World or PAK'nSAVE or something.
Food Town, I'm old.
Yeah, there you go.
But I'll tell you what, it was the most glorious couple of years of my life.
Yeah.
I went to an all-boys school, Palmy Boys High, and so it was the closest interaction I had with girls at that stage of my life. And from a social aspect, I loved it. I started off as a packer, ended up being a checkout operator, loved it.
Yep, and look, my first paid job was in retail in a paint and wallpaper shop, and then started doing nightfall in a Woolworths in Lower Hutt. Don't tell anyone. And, they are fantastic jobs. You learn how to work hard, you learn how to be productive, you learn how to engage with people and customers, you learn what standards look like. So many things you learn from that you may not pick up in an office.
When you do a grocery shop, maybe it's at a Foursquare over the summer holidays, like you're away from home, what do you see in a store that the rest of us wouldn't see?
Look, I think you see, the different departments, and Foursquare is a great example, particularly over summer when it's under pressure, right? They're a small building pumping 2-3 times the volume that they might during the year. So it's, huge respect for those teams in those regions and those owners that make that work. And so what you see, firstly, fresh matters most, right? Most stores you walk onto, produce and fruit and veg first. It's growing as a category. It's what people, to be honest, a bar-coded product, a packet of Weet-Bix or a packet of biscuits, they are what they are. Where you make a difference is in those fresh departments. So that's the first thing you see is, am I seeing, is it attractive? Is it engaging? Is it good quality product? Is it displayed well? Have they got the range? Those are the sort of things you quickly assess. Just think as I say all this, my wife will be laughing going, what the hell would he know? And then you notice retail standards. So you can look at a shelf and go, is it gappy? Is it full? Is it clean and good to go? You notice the team. Are the team sort of engaging? Are they thinking about customers around them? You notice engagement at checkout. So all of those things. Then you start getting into next level. Is price being displayed really clearly? Are people getting the signals about where the deals are? So there's all these things. But, full, fresh and friendly is a great start for any grocery store.
Do many of the staff in these stores know who you are?
More and more, yeah.
How's that? Do you notice?
Look, so not knowing names, it's a lot wear name badges, thank goodness. And I've probably learned over the years just to go, hey, look, sorry, what's your name? What do you do? Because no point in pretending otherwise or making it awkward.
Yeah.
But yeah, you do notice, and sometimes you get followed around the store because they want to show you something or tell you something, which is great. Because they're proud of what they do. Incredible people. And as I say, the last few years has been a bit tough, for them socially at sports or church or social to say, I work for this store or that store because people have had a head full of opinions.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it that bad?
Yep. It's the one thing, there is a lot of feedback. It is better now, but in the last 12 to 18 months, it's been... and then there's been the whole retail crime issue and how we keep our people safe because they deserve to be able to work safe.
Well, yeah, I mentioned that pop-up, the news pop-up I got yesterday in relation to grocery store prices, but I got another one about an hour after that about someone that was in court for an incident at a West Auckland supermarket that was shoplifting and then assaulted staff with an umbrella.
Yes.
Is this like a daily thing, a weekly thing?
Oh, yeah, it is around 5,000 times a quarter in the North Island.
Unbelievable.
Yep.
How many of these make it to your level?
Anything that turns into violence, I hear about. So every morning part of that heartbeat is safety, and then you hear about any incidences in store. So, not too many weeks go by where I'm not hearing about a weapon pulled, where I'm not hearing about a scuffle or a physical event, or not hearing about a break-in or some sort of raid on the store. And it's when you've got 353 stores across the network, this is what's happening out there. And it has, retail crime has no address. It's everywhere. So any misbelief people have that it's sort of happening in some suburb versus other suburbs, that's not true.
Yeah, well, there was an incident in St Heliers at a Foursquare maybe 3-4 years ago, where someone came in and with a knife and was like attacking customers and the staff.
Had stabbed a customer.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just can't imagine how traumatic that would be for the staff involved.
Oh, incredible. Yeah, and it is, you think, the fact we have to train people how to de-escalate these situations, it's a supermarket, what on earth? And it's what led us to, we did quite a lot of work in the last couple of years using facial recognition technology and developing that as a process and a policy with the Privacy Commission, because I look at what we're doing and some have stab-proof vests, some, and you go, they're all for after an incident has started. How do we prevent... the safest thing to do is hide the matches, not put out the fire. So how do we bring that forward? And there's some really simple stuff. It's amazing, like a simple difference being greeted at the front door makes, because that instantly creates a bit of, okay, I've engaged with another person. I'm not just walking in sort of without any humanity. And then, but facial recognition, so it's a very simple thing. If someone has been barred from the store previously for a violent or aggressive act, and we've trespassed them, then we say, you can't come in. The facial recognition picks them up on entry. 2 managers engage and just say, hey, Dom, you're not supposed to be here. Come on your way. That is the most successful. That reduced retail crime in our stores 16%.
Yeah.
So made our people safer and made customers safer.
If you could change one structural thing about New Zealand's grocery sector overnight, what would it be?
Look, one structural thing, I would really test for all of the regulation we work under that it has a benefit for consumers. This industry is like every other industry. We've got to get cost out of it to be able to do a better job on price and value. Things that add cost in then don't help us be lower on price. The other thing, we just got to understand who we are. So we took some of our owners to Italy last year and saw a whole bunch of stores so that we could learn and pick up ideas and think about our future design of some of our stores. And you walk the aisles of a big supermarket in Italy, and there's an aisle of amazing breads, or there's an aisle of amazing salami or cheeses or those things, and you'll go, wow, that would work. And I just reminded everyone, in Italy there are 202 people per square kilometre. In New Zealand there are 20. Which is, we love, that's what makes New Zealand, but you also just got to go, okay, how does that change how you regulate and operate our industries to be the best they can be? So just adjusting for that. It's not a structural thing, but the one other thing I really wish everyone would understand is what a cooperative is. Because even people say, 24,000 people work for you. They don't. About 2,000 do. The other 22,000 work for the families that own each of the stores. And sometimes people talk about a duopoly in New Zealand. They go, it's Woolworths and Foodstuffs.
Yes, yeah.
Our stores, it's like every New Zealand person who, we're competitive as people, I believe. So every one of our stores, they care much more about beating another one of our stores than they do about beating Woolworths. Trust me.
I was going to ask you that. Like, is it quite tribal? Like,
it's like a family, right? So when needed, they band together beautifully and very strongly. Otherwise, fight like hell.
Just like the Anzacs.
Yeah, it's just...
We hate the Aussies, but if push comes to shove, we're there for each other.
So if we've got a common enemy, all good. Meantime, and, if we want something, if we're focused on something improving, just publish a list of the best one to the worst one of ours and stand back. And the competitive nature of each of the owners takes over. They just all strive to be better. So it's, PAK'nSAVE competes with New World, and then they compete with each other. So there is a natural competitive effect in the market that isn't well understood.
Geez, you're into it. How long have you been in the role now? Like 11 years? 10 years?
10 years. September 2015, so a little bit more than 10.
We've been going for 37 minutes. There's so much to talk about. We might have to go back to the beginning and then build back up to it. Things like, I didn't really sort of think about this until I was prepping for the podcast yesterday, but a phrase like supply chain, like before 2020, I don't think I'd ever heard or used that phrase. Now it's in the common sort of vernacular. But one more before we move on. Do you use a New World club card, or you don't worry about it?
No, I do.
You do?
Yeah, absolutely. For a couple of reasons. One, because I need to know what a customer's seeing. So we walk stores. Like, part of my diary is a day a month I'm on the road visiting a region and seeing every store I possibly can. Because if I lose contact with that, then everything else starts to lose context and accuracy. So using a club card is part of that experience. The other one is using our online shopping. If you don't use it, then you don't know what a customer's seeing. So you must be doing things that customers are doing all the time. And just quickly back to that, not knowing the word supply chain, the word I love the most that came out at that time is essential worker. Because, these folks who are the most important, in our building, our cafeteria is shared with our warehouse team and our office team. So there's high visors and, shirts sitting around. And that is one of the most important parts about culture is that every job is valued. And the coolest thing out of that was people went essential workers is something to be proud of. And being able to tell those members of our team what you do matters to families just like yours really mattered.
Yeah, well, I found it particularly heartbreaking a second ago where you talked about some of the staff like getting a bollocking at church or whatever, because they do a great job. And you talk about the culture. Having been in the position where I live right next door to a supermarket, I can see how much the comradeship and the culture meant to those staff that worked there. It wasn't just a job; it was like a community.
Yeah, absolutely it is, and they've. We spend at least a third of our lives at work. So, relationships, children, changes, tragedies would have all happened in the lunchroom, and all been discussed and supported and thought about. One of the nicest things that's happened in my time, and I'm very careful never to claim credit for something I didn't do. So, I always try and go, the team did this. But this was one I did pick up and sponsored at least and then got a lot of people to do. But we had very early on in my time, we had a real tragedy with one of the leadership team got sick and passed from cancer. And what the organisation did in response to that to support his family was incredible. It meant that his 3 kids got educated right through to the end of university. Wow. So it was, and you sort of look at that and go, I'm proud of that. And then you went, why just for that, given we've got 24,000 people, there's so many of these stories going on. So build a thing called the Foodies Foundation. So basically what it does is it's for our 24,000 families. And a lot of us put money in out of pay regularly. You just payroll giving. We run a lot of fundraising events. We run big auctions, and our owners, have a couple of wines, then buy stuff they shouldn't for more than they ever should, and it just puts money in the tin for this amazing foundation. And to date, I didn't check the number before, but it'll be nearly 1,000 families supported across 5 years. And basically what it does is if an issue hits, so there's a domestic violence or there's a diagnosis or something, they can contact our trustees, who are just people from all over the organisation. It's not a hierarchical thing. And just say, I'm in trouble, I need help. And they can get $5,000 in their hands in 24 hours.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah. And it's, it just keeps going in the organisation. People pick it up and take it forward, run it, put their time into it, and it delivers for people in amazing situations, in tragic situations.
Oh, nice stuff. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. We touched upon your childhood and your parents earlier, but I heard a story. Were you headhunted to be head boy of St. Pat's? I've never, ever heard of this happening before.
Well, it's probably overstating it.
Shoulder tap.
But shoulder tap, yeah. I can't remember where I said it. I don't know how you found out. But I was thinking about, leadership and when you first get challenged with it. And St. Pat's Silverstone, right, was a boarding school and day school, so there was a head boy of each, sort of one of each. And a fantastic guy, Tony Egan, was the head boarder. And I remember in the last week of sixth form, one of the priests saying, "Hey, are you coming back next year? Because we'd like to talk to you about this." And you're like, have I just been headhunted? What was the package? Nothing.
Terrible negotiation.
Yeah.
Good lesson there.
Yeah. But, it was, you just sort of, I don't think until that point I'd ever thought that I was someone who would, be like that or, stand out. You never really considered that, I never thought about running at it or doing it. You just went, oh, okay, yes.
Well, a school like that, there's a lot of testosterone. There's a lot of alpha sort of males, a lot of big personalities. What made you stand out? Do you think leaders are born or made?
I do think in the end there's some things you can't make. So there's some basic, I think about leadership. Everyone says, "What do you think leadership is?" And you go, "Look, it's a lot of things, but it is a set of behaviours, not a set of tasks." So someone who's made a manager is not a leader. You've just been made a manager. Leadership is your choice about your behaviours. And the simplest definition I've ever sort of found and stuck to is connection, so being really connected. The ability to engage and to know customers, people, teams, whatever stakeholders. Clarity, because in a busier and busier and busier world, leadership's a bit about going, you know what, we're going there, whatever there is. And then the ability to generate and deliver action. So, making people move forward, getting somewhere, monitoring it, supporting it, getting a result. So it's connection, clarity, and action. I still don't know why I got picked out in sixth form.
Yeah, why? Yeah, the brother or the priest must have seen something in you that maybe you couldn't even see in yourself at that point.
I think a lot of leadership now, and I think it doesn't matter what your style is, because everyone's style is different, but communication is inescapable in leadership. If you can't connect through communication, it's really, there's going to be a problem. So I do think maybe that was the bit that stood out a bit. When I look back, I go, if I'm any good at anything, one of the things is sort of communicating with some authenticity and clarity out of quite complex pieces. I can sometimes hear a whole lot of stuff and go, look, I think this is about donk, donk, donk. And, so maybe. Yeah.
Were you always pretty good at that communication aspect, or is that something you've had to work on?
I've definitely had to work on. Yeah, I was lucky, it was a college that had, appreciation for arts as much as sport. So oratory, debating, things like that were all part of what everybody did. It didn't make you soft. So it was great to, just do that. I did a bit of that at university as well, and you just sort of, I think if there is something I'm lucky to have, it's a communication ability.
Yeah, so you went to university, studied accounting and law. What did you want to be?
Employed. So, look, a business felt right. Accounting seemed like a profession that would, go some way. Law was probably more of an interest and passion. I was quite, I enjoyed it. And first job was in a, very much an accounting role. It was in a paint factory, ICI Paints in Gracefield and Lower Hutt. And you learnt the very basics of how a product is made and how it's transitioned through channels. Funny, one of the things we did there was take the retail businesses and franchise them out, to independent owners. I look back now and go, it's such a New Zealand model.
From there, did you go to, is that when you went to Telecom?
No, there was roughly 2-year roles. So when I finished university, went to ICI Paints in Gracefield as a divisional accountant or company accountant, and then I went to Mitel as in an accounting roles, supporting the CFO. That was a small technology company, sort of less than 100 people, right at the beginning of big, PABX systems and data systems and things like that. A lot of fun, and got connected with the world of sales and the world of marketing and, some really large characters and some pretty outrageous behaviours. But also the technology cycles were moving fast and they missed the beginning of call centre, which meant the business, they ended up deciding to pull out of New Zealand. We sold the rights for the technology to distribute it to Telecom. And that's where that move happened.
So what year was that?
1991.
Right. Yeah, what was Telecom like when you first joined?
So different. There were 5 telecoms. So it was Telecom Wellington that I joined. There was a Central, Auckland, and 2 in the South Island at the time. There was over 25,000 people in Telecom. I think I read yesterday there's now 4,000 in Spark.
Wow.
And it was the beginning. This was pre-mobile. Hard to believe. I think I got one of the first mobile phones. I managed to bag one, literally, and they were a bag. It was about the size of an A4 pad.
It was massive, yeah.
You unzipped it and pulled out the handset that had a curly cord to the device and stuck up the aerial.
And calls were like $8 a minute or something?
Yeah, no one can afford to make one of those. And, it was the beginning. So it was such a incredible time because the technology rush that was coming through, things were changing so fast.
Did you? I've got Dame Teresa Gadding coming in for a podcast next week. Did you work under her?
Yes.
Was she there at that time?
Yeah, I wasn't in her leadership team. I was next level, but Teresa was CEO for quite a while. Yeah.
Yeah, how was she? Anything you learned from her or got from her that I could bring up when she comes in?
Yeah, look, a hugely dynamic leader, intelligent, very she was, I'm trying to remember exactly, I hope I don't misquote it, I think she was 37 or 38 when made CEO.
It's wild, eh?
And as a female, unfortunately at a time where that felt odd to people, which it never should have, it was an incredible achievement, so not only about her capability, but about a chairman that believed in her and about, leadership team. I look at that leadership team at the time, so Simon Mutter and Marco Bogowaski, people like that, it was a very, very strong environment. That organisation over the years has built some amazing leaders.
Yeah, of which you were one, and you were there for over 20 years. So many telco changes in that time, like you mentioned cellular phones before, but also the internet.
Yes.
I suppose fax machines were a big item when you first... Were they the hot ticket item?
They were. I remember when I joined, there wasn't sales as such. There was people taking orders because there was no other game in town. And you had people who were called salespeople standing by fax machines, receiving orders faxed in from customers. I reckon if I showed my kids a fax machine now, they'd go, that's amazing. Like the piece of paper goes from here to here. You think, it's just so... I also look at people on rotary dial phones now. I don't think a lot of kids would know how to use one.
Yeah, it's wild, the changes that we've seen. Yeah. So massive changes in the telco industry over that time. What about you personally? What changes in Chris Quin over that time?
Oh, everything changed. Yeah. You've got married, you had a family, we shifted to Auckland, so everything about life changed to some extent. But also in that industry, roughly every 3 years you change jobs. And the thing it sort of taught me was there's trade-offs in big companies because some people go, big corporates, it's got, a lot of drag with it. What you do get is recognised for who you are wider than the job you do. So, I often say to people who are doing tell me what to do with my career, which I always find a really tricky question, but... In a small company, you're always going to be what you are. So if you're the accountant, you're the accountant. When you look for roles maybe in another place, they go, well, you're an accountant. In a bigger company, they go, look, we think we know the person, we know their wider skill set, we've seen them be very good at this, they might have done a project. So your chance to grow your career, and I think change hunters really matter. You should look around for the challenges and go and have a go. And the one thing I try and say to people is, one, get into a role where you're leading people, so you can show that you can do that. Secondly, in a role where you can go, I took a business from here to here, or I doubled its turnover, or I did something that I can point at. Because what people care about is what outcomes did you drive, not did you work hard, because everyone does. And, think about industries. Am I on an industry that's heading uphill rather than one on the down, because on the down can be quite hard work.
Yeah, and that's never been more appropriate now than with the rapidly developing AI scene, eh? Oh, and just the amount of jobs that'll be obsolete in the coming years.
Yeah, that is such a mind-blowing story right now. Will the jobs be obsolete, or will we find new jobs? I really believe that what it's going to do is two things. One, it's going to make everybody's job move up the value chain. So the things that you do are of the least value, that's probably going to get automated. Secondly, there are going to be services and things people do that have not thought of that will come to light. We're still humans. We're still going to want to be entertained. We're still going to want to have great experiences. We were talking about it today with a group of my store owners going, will people just use an agent to do the grocery shop and never come in? And you go, well, they've been able to do that for quite a few years with e-commerce, and they're still coming in because people get joy from shopping for food. It's an experience. There are very few people. Right now, about 5% of our sales are done through online. About 50% of our customers use it, but what it means is they're using it occasionally for some things, and most often they're coming in to shop. So we're mostly doing a joint. We still want a human experience.
That makes sense. You see so many people probably blissfully unaware that they're doing it, but wandering the aisles singing. That's something I notice. Are you a singer?
Hell no.
Just humming away to whatever's playing through the speakers.
Me singing in a store would be really bad for turnover. What you do see quite often is men like me wandering the aisles looking. I know I need this, I don't know what aisle it's in.
I get that too. Yeah, my partner will send me photos of items that she wants, and it's like, I've looked everywhere, I can't find it. So during that time at Telecom and then Spark, is there a moment that stands out where you thought, actually, I might be quite good at this leadership thing?
Look, I think crisis, unfortunately, it also builds leaders. And there's a thing about crisis where you go, so how do I get the behaviours that you get during a crisis all of the time? But, the ones that stand out a little bit, the XT mobile network, I don't know if you remember that, but I reckon a bunch of listeners will. And that was a classic example. We were behind in technology. So we had 2G mobile technology, which meant our customers couldn't text. Can you imagine that now? Like, no one would be on our network, not that network. So we built this new network. It was called the XT network, and it was going to be the latest and greatest thing. I remember the conversations about should we go slowly, make sure it's working, make sure capacity's okay. And there was such a fervour about going fast that we did. And within 4 to 6 weeks, it stopped working. And so you've got hundreds of thousands of users on it. This has been one of the biggest profile technology launches, and it stops. And what made it sort of worse was it was worse the further south you went. So, Auckland, not as bad as Dunedin, so you can imagine so this was a daily news, media updates, fronting sort of thing. I was running the business and government team, so every business customer was mine. And you just go, oh crap, so you're fronting it, you're trying to get information from your technology guys going, when's this going to be fixed? You're trying to talk to customers. And I ended up, 2 or 3 times a week sending 4,000 or 5,000 emails. I'd written under my name going, this is where we are. This is what we're trying to do to help you. Do you want us to roll you back? Do you want us to shift you to a competitor? Because we'll do what we need to do to not affect your business. So that was an incredible time, TV, everything. So quite a thing. And then I do remember vividly afterwards, we did what we called the nationwide apology tour. So hit the road, and I went to, you went to your chambers of commerce, your business communities, and just said, we're coming to town, we're going to tell you what happened, we're going to apologise, we want to hear from you. And I remember being in Dunedin, driving up, I think it's Rattray Street, so it goes past the telephone exchange there, and a car came out of a side street and T-boned the car I was in. It was with one of the sales reps who'd picked me up at the airport. And I was sitting there covered in the window glass going, they're really angry, aren't they? I don't think it was deliberate, but yeah.
God, that must have been an incredibly stressful time.
Yeah, because the next one inside the telecom days was the Christchurch earthquakes. And the business unit that I was running at the time, I had 1,403 staff in the square. So there were 3 buildings around the square and the Exchange building and a couple of others. So it was, that day was incredible because it was so hard to get clarity. You didn't really know what had happened. Then you find out what had happened. And you very quickly develop a process. So these events, and we're seeing, sadly, so many of them. Like this year, we've already seen 2 decent weather events that have had impact. You firstly go, job 1, are our people safe? And how do we find out and how do we know? Job 2, what role do we play in the community right now? Because if our team is safe, then our job is the community. Today it's food. Back then it was how do we get them connected so that emergency services can do their job and people can find people and all of those things. My reflection on that, then you go to COVID, then you go, there's been so many of these moments for New Zealand leaders. And what I see happen is collaboration goes through the roof. So people who are a bit unhelpful or, self-centered suddenly go, what do I need to do? What do I need to do to support you? How do we, how do we collaborate? Accountability goes through the roof. So if you say you're going to do something by a date and a time, you do because it's got a purpose. Communication, people lift communication and that's what you must do. And then innovation. Sometimes the things we did post-earthquake, like, we need a new data centre somewhere. Or, normally that would be a year-long business case planning, so on. If you just went, okay, do it. We've got a week. How do we make this happen? Auckland floods, what are we talking, 3 and a bit years ago now? Our biggest impact was PAK'nSAVE Wairau Park. That store has 50,000 customers a day go through it, and it was a couple of metres deep. That it's hard to imagine when you go through it now. We had to strip it entirely, replace all the refrigeration, all the shelving, all of the product, all of the back of house, and get it open again to trade in 7 days and nights. And you look at that and go, I had some incredible leaders who planned that, executed it. The store team were unbelievable. You stand back, the stuff you don't understand. Where do you get all the refrigeration from? You go to stores you haven't finished building and take it. You know, how do you get rid of 100 tons of food? All of those things.
You sort of alluded to this earlier in the podcast, but that sort of collaboration in a disaster or a crisis, is there any way that can be duplicated in day to day?
That's exactly the right question. So collaboration, communication, innovation, accountability, they're things you'd love to have every day. So I think the difference is sense of purpose. So in a crisis, everyone has a really high sense of purpose. You know, one of our stores just quietly, with the help from our Harvey New Zealand Fund, supported the emergency services workers at the Mount earlier this year. 7,000 meals just delivered, you know, because you look and go, these people are working hard, they're working long shifts, it's pretty emotionally difficult work. How do we make sure they've got a hot cup of tea and a sandwich and just, look after that? And that store has never had to do that work before. They just worked it out because people had our purpose. And that's, I think, as a leadership thing, you keep thinking, okay, how do I establish purpose in this work?
I suppose that sense of purpose gives people also a sense of urgency that is otherwise missing.
Yeah. And also the collaboration. Me trying to be better than you feels silly. Like just, what do I need to do? What do you need to do?
What was it like being at Telecom when it switched to Spark? What did you think of the name change? Names are funny things, aren't they? Like you look at Vodafone going to One, and when you first hear One, you're like, what is One? That's weird.
Yeah.
It must have been the same as Spark.
Yeah.
Spark's part of the vernacular now, but it seems very odd at the time.
Yes, yeah. And it's like a lot of moments like that. There are probably 100 people who would say I did that. So I was leading the home and mobile division. So that was the bit that was at the core of renaming it Spark. But Simon was CEO, and he had Andrew Stone and a couple of other people, and Jason Paris. There was a leadership group around that, and everybody contributed to making that happen. That was one of those where you stand back and go, look, what would be required to make Telecom loved versus what's required to establish a new brand. And you actually, that was the first part of the work was how do you get that? You make a decision. And then we made the decision, it's going to be a better journey to change the name, so let's do it. It was going to be too hard to undo people's long-held perception of Telecom, and it had a whole lot of history that was useful to maybe park and build new history. You then go, but you can't do it overnight because all you'll do is put lipstick on a pig. It's just, and it doesn't make the pig any better looking, it just makes them unhappy. So then go, okay, how do we earn the right to change the brand? And that was quite a big program of getting pricing right, service right. It was about a year and a half. Like there was quite a while before we did it. We didn't know what the brand was going to be. That was just we'd agreed to change it. Then you go to choosing the name, and look, I am not a brand marketer, so I smile when they come in and go, this means this, and this colour means peace, and this means harm, and you just go...
You're the expert.
Yeah, sure. But, there was, in the end, I always believe, and you sort of noted it, the brand will become what people experience over time. The actual name... you look around at the world's best brands, there's some pretty odd brands, but it's what we believe they are that matters.
Yeah.
So I do remember I was in Europe when we launched. I think one of our launches was briefing all of our investors. We're going to change it, and this is the brand. And it was about 3 a.m. I was in some hotel room somewhere in Spain, I think. And, I was on a speaking part, saying, this is what we're going to call it. And I remember the first question on the, had one of those automated question things was, do you know that's crap spelt backwards? Spark is... And you went, no, never thought of that. So it's funny. Any name, someone will try and find that thing. And you go, you know what, you just got to be committed. So commitment to executing it brilliantly is going to overcome everything. Well,
after a while, it just becomes an entity on its own. Look at Stuff. Stuff is the weirdest name for a news website.
Yeah. Exactly.
So you didn't sign off on the squiggle logo?
No, the cat's bum.
Oh, the cat's bum. Oh, I've never thought that.
That's what a lot of people. Yeah,
really?
Yeah. Look, the great news about social media and about open environments is everyone's opinion's easily available.
Yeah. So you went for the CEO role twice. I've heard a quote from you saying you were too short the first time, too tall the next, which is a great quote.
That's not fair on Simon.
But that must have been incredibly disappointing.
Yes, and energising in a funny way after a while. So Paul Reynolds was the too short one. He was the 6'8" Scotsman, so was never going to compete with that. And second time, probably first time was a bit of a long shot moment. Second time, I don't think I'm inaccurate in saying I was probably an internal candidate that was in the set. However, what it taught me, Simon, incredible leader, delivered amazingly, deserved the role, and absolutely did the best job anyone could do, no question. And also you look at it and go, there was a moment there where the change required was so extreme that it can be incredibly difficult to do it from a long time experience internally. It's just hard to let go of everything you know and believe. And sometimes you have to come in and go, I'm just not going to get stuck in some of those things. The other thing, you learned a lot about the perspective that a CEO needs to bring to the organisation. So I had the most brilliant detailed plan for the board. What they needed was inspiration and vision. So, that was another, was a really valuable lesson. I remember, you agonise for a while because I am a competitive soul. So you go, I lost and I hate losing, and you go, so why did I lose? And you ask a few supporters and mentors, why'd you lose? And one of them got sick of me asking, and he just said, Chris, you are not, they did not choose you. That's it. That's the answer. There is nothing else. So stop looking for it. The next question is, what do you want to do for the next one? And once you get to that acceptance, then you go, okay, I'll stop being a victim about this. And it was, I originally decided get out of the way. I would refuse to be a slightly annoyed sort of second place guy hanging around. Simon was brilliant. He sort of said, look, I need you to do something else because this business needs fixing. Give me 3 years, and then we can shake hands. And I will give you the room to do it. And he did. And we had a great time getting it done. And it finished, really positively with a great successor and all of those things. So,
I was going to ask you if it like damaged your ego in any way, or if you sulked for a while. But I feel like you've sort of potentially answered that with the last answer.
Yeah. Yes.
You can't. Well, you can't help but feel a little bit personally attacked, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, not attacked, just disappointed. In yourself. I think most people who are relatively achievement driven and want to have an impact are hard on themselves. I think it's part of what you drive. It's really important that you've also got to go, and I'm no more or less than I was before. It's just this moment. But it also equipped me really well for what happened next. So
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. All the things you've talked about, all the little things like the apology tour with the 2G thing, the Christchurch earthquake, all these things are sort of sharpening the axe, eh? Like, and adversity is hard to go through for anyone, but it does build resilience, and also it prepares you for what's coming next. Was it hard to leave after that long? Why didn't you just sort of stay there and get comfortable? And
I think because I knew I had more. One of the things the organisation did for me, the Spark organisation, was say, hey, look, let's get you into world-class development experience. So I did 6 weeks at Stanford in October 2014. And, that was a great chance to get out, to live in a different place. You're living on campus like a student. It was great. And with a global set of leaders, and all of those experiences, I always think about it, you learn half from the class, half from the colleagues. And so it's the beers at night, it's the conversations, it's the dinners, I ran San Francisco Marathon while I was there with a few of them. Those things you do, you learn so much more from as much as the classes. Having said that, they're world-class classes, sort of global figures lecturing. Came back, and one of the classes, I remember it quite vividly, they said, write a 6-word story about your next step. And they gave some examples, and so I ended up writing just much good done, not done yet. And, it really helped me because I was able to go much good done, be proud of where you are, be okay with it, all of it, but also not done yet.
If you were to write that 6-word story today, what would it say?
I'd say the same.
Yeah. Interesting.
Right now? Yep, I really would. And 10 years is a long time in a CEO role. It's unusual, but there is... there's been phases to that have meant it wasn't right to do anything different, but that much good done, not done yet, that is still true.
What would you want to do next? What would your dream job be?
Look, I don't know yet. I don't know today.
Oh, you do. You just can't say. You don't want to say.
No, I'm not looking right now. There is a job still to do, you know, and but also a key responsibility of any CEO is making sure there is strong succession in place. And particularly in something like a cooperative, because they're harder to learn. They are complex in their cultures and in their connections and how they work and how to be successful in one. It is not the same as a corporate. It's a different leadership style. And, if someone arrives and doesn't understand that, they can bump up pretty hard. So that's it's a thing I think about as you think about developing people. I've got a little bit of change in my team right now. And part of the thinking is, how do we make sure we've got succession and capability for the future?
When do you know when the job's done and you're not just like an old guy overstaying his welcome? Do you ever know for sure?
Oh, I think you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really think you do. And one thing I've always promised myself is don't stay past that. And that's not about, you're not worn out. You're just going, I think I've given everything I know how to give to here. If I look at, the first 5 years, there was a lot of, I'm really proud of the transformations we did. Then you hit 3 years of COVID, and that was an incredible time for any grocery organisation, right? We were at the, pretty much at the centre of a lot of what was going on. Then we hit market regulation and, a massive engagement around that. Then we tried to get a merger done. You look at those big phases, there's now still a job to do to make the organisation better, and we can. So that's the play right now.
Yeah, so you got this job. You were appointed CEO of Foodstuffs North Island after a global search. So did you apply, or did you get asked to apply?
You get approached by a search agent, who's going, hey, we're looking for this. You're on our list. Do you want to talk about it?
Must be incredibly flattering.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it's one of the things when I'm trying to coach and support people that, ask for that from me, which is always a privilege when you get asked. And they'll say, I've been rung about this job. And you go, tell me about it. And I go, well, it's in Kathmandu and it's doing this. And I go, I know what happened here, which is you got a phone call from someone saying they wanted you. And that's an amazing feeling. But when did you decide Kathmandu? Because sometimes people go, just being wanted is attractive enough as opposed to being clear on what it is you want next.
It's flattering, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's good for the ego.
Yeah. Everybody loves to be told they're wanted. Yeah.
So did you have imposter syndrome? Are you familiar with the term imposter syndrome? Did you have that at the beginning? Like it seems like most of your adult life to that point had been in the telco space.
Yep.
But is it just completely transferable or completely different thing? You must have had a lot to learn, eh?
Yeah. I mean, imposter syndrome is a different thing. And I think, I do feel that sometimes you look around and go, I'm talking to these people or I'm doing this thing. And, or some days you go, there's quite a big call to make here. Have I really got what I need to make that call? The transition from telco to Foodstuffs, I remember at the time there was, I sort of made a number of discussions or presentations with people fascinated by that. And you stand back from and go, look, leadership is leadership. So that's the first one. Driving performance through people is not different. New Zealanders as consumers. So I've been running the retail consumer business for Spark for 3 years. So knowing what New Zealanders are about, what was on their minds, and particularly in that phase, that 3 year period around, 20, what are we talking about, 12 to 14 or 15 and 15 to 18, what was society thinking and doing? The thing that was fundamentally different is, what's the value chain in this business? Like, how does it be successful? What does it have to do well to succeed? One of the things I love about it is it's a physical business. Big buildings, 320 trucks. We shift a lot of product. Like, you can see and touch what you do. You can walk into a store and see physically what we deliver. Technology is quite different, right? You have to believe the values at that connection. So it's been a lot of fun and really enjoyed it. Co-ops are different to corporates. Sort of, if you think this CEO role is you send an email to all our store owners saying we need to do this next and they get on and do it, think again. And co-op, someone said to me very early on, and they were right, it's the perfect balance of agile decision making, so know when you've got to be a leader and decide, with deep consultation and slow decision making. And the trick is knowing which issue sits in which bucket. I think that's a lot about modern leadership. I don't think many cultures now are command and control. You have to engage people in what you're doing and, convincing them it's the right thing to do and then getting their purpose set on doing it, then you get a result.
How long were you in the job before you felt comfortable, like you were on top of things?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And was there a Chris Quin there, like someone that had gone for the job twice that missed out? Or?
Yeah. Look, there was some strong talent that had applied internally. Yeah. So that part of that's always interesting. Like whenever you talk to someone who's being promoted from within a team to leader, or someone who comes in, the first thing you've got to be really careful about is you're not sorry you got the job. Mm-hmm. So don't apologise for that, or you go, I'm excited, I'm proud, I'm determined. This is a big challenge. You have to be happy and confident you got the job. Secondly, you then have to talk to them and go, right, so now what's going to light your fire next? Because and it was helpful to have been in a position where you'd gone for a CEO role and not got it. So you could say, look, I've lived this moment a bit. This is my experience of it. And this is what I chose to do about it in the end. And, I remember some of the conversations. It was clearly, so either reset and go as hard as you can here, or make a positive choice about doing that somewhere. But don't be here being unhappy about what happened.
Those conversations, I feel like that loops back to what you were saying before about your dad, about not crossing the road.
Yeah.
Because it'd be very easy just to ignore those conversations like the elephant in the room and let them sort of fester.
Yeah. If there was, any people situation we've ended up having to do quite a difficult or confrontational or very determinative thing, I've never walked away going, I did that too soon. Often you walk away going, I left that too long.
Yeah.
So, I keep thinking about how do you have a straight up, respectful conversation. I can't remember who it was, but someone recently in a session we're doing, the great tip was start with, I care enough about you to tell you straight. And, it's such
I love that.
Yeah, such a, powerful way to do that.
I feel like that's not just for business, but for personal interactions as well.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's probably a great way to frame a conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And hard, particularly when they are hard subjects.
Yeah. I forget what the exact stat was, but when I had Sir Steve Hansen on the podcast, he had a quote that he'd say to the All Blacks, and I think he called them 80%ers or 20%ers, and he was like, look, 80% of the conversations we have are going to be positive, 20% probably will be difficult. Just, so 8 times out of 10, it's going to be nice, small talk, but the other 2 times out of 10, it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah. Yep, I remember a time in Telecom where we were measuring engagement, the sort of, one of those scores that big organisations use to go, are our people happy and positive and engaged and that. And our engagement scores were really strong and the share price had gone down to a third of what it was. And you go, how can that disconnect happen? And it was fundamentally not focused on the hard things, which is we have a cost problem, we have a performance problem, we're not growing fast enough, whatever it was. And it was a big lesson, and you've got to connect people's sense of purpose with performance that matters to the business. And then when you do, you get absolute satisfaction and engagement and energy and excitement. If you don't connect those things, it's just a party.
Yeah.
And the parties don't last.
Yeah, you mentioned just before, you reckon it took around about 2 years to feel like you had your head around the job you were doing.
Yep.
What were the biggest surprises in those first couple of years?
I think... one, understanding the value chain, so the role that our partner suppliers play in how the business worked. Understanding, the systems and technology, understanding the physicalness, but a lot about how to make change happen. How do you take a cooperative, so, quite literally 2,000 of the people work for you and you've got, if there is any hierarchical power, you have some of that. And 22,000 people don't work for you. They just work in the banners and in the brands and, have a local owner who they work for. So learning how to make change happen successfully. And there's a change model called ADCAR. It's 5 letters that stand for stuff, but the first 2 really matter. So 1, awareness. Does everyone understand what we're trying to change and why? And the second one is desire. Does everyone think it's a good thing to do? So before you do any work, get those 2 things right. If you don't, all the work's going to be difficult because people are going to push back and, step out and get in the way and do those things. If everyone's aware why and what it's going to deliver and everyone actually goes, this is a good thing, you can make change happen.
Wow, there's been so many good leadership lessons in this podcast already. It's fantastic. the fact that you remember all these things, it tells me they do sort of like whir along in the back of your mind with your decision-making process.
Yeah, they do. You do. And, the enemy, the problem with being busy, and I challenge myself on this, full diaries, those sort of things, is you don't get enough time to stand back from the situation and go, what is actually going on here, and how do we not go through every step, but we get to the powerful moment where we make a difference. And you mentioned imposter syndrome before. Sometimes you feel like, if I make this decision, is it going to have negative impact in places and stuff? Sometimes the organisation's going, tell us your decision. Because we'll do it, but you need to tell us and be resolute about it. Commitment to the outcome is the most powerful thing.
Yeah.
I often say to people, sometimes you've got quite hard choices. You might go, should we build a blue one, a yellow one, or a green one? And sometimes you get to the point of analysis where you go, look, I just can't use the spreadsheet to make this call. It's not going to give me the answer. We're going to build the yellow one. Good news, we'll never know if the blue or green one would have worked. So forget it. Let's make the yellow one work really well.
Yeah, just make a decision, then make it the right decision.
Yeah, just execution will determine outcome. Yeah. So go.
I've got a card here which is called COVID and Crisis Leadership. How's that for you to talk about? Is it triggering to talk about? Or
It's not triggering to talk about, but I tell you one thing I can't do is I can't work from home. PTSD sets in. It's that whole COVID and working from home thing, and it's really interesting because from a social and business point of view, it's become there's quite a moment, right, in the last year of, so what's the right setting? Do we get people to the office? All of those things. It's fascinating in our world. Our youngest team members come to the office nearly 100%. Why? Because working at home is romantic unless you are working in your bedroom on an ironing board. So it's a conversation led by people who might have a study in their house, but affects people who live in a multi-person flat.
Yeah. Also, it's like we were talking before about this, the social interactions and the sort of culture at the supermarkets. Like people like being around other people other than their family.
Yep. And younger people in particular, I like community and I like having a leader I can learn from and I like being around, and we're really blessed to have a bunch of people that, drive like a fitness club and a social club and stuff like that. So there's community outside of the work that just, means people love being there, which is really, really cool. But look, COVID, what an incredible moment, in every country in the world. But, New Zealand was probably at a relatively extreme set of conditions and practices and settings. I remember it vividly, 28th of February, about 6 p.m, I was at home having a beer on the deck with someone who lived in the same suburb who actually owned one of our stores. So, we were just having a Friday catch-up. And both of our phones started going nuts. And we heard on the news, because I think the trigger was the first New Zealand case. It was a gentleman who'd come back from, I think, the UAE, and he'd come back and been diagnosed. So that sort of was the moment where for New Zealand it went from an interesting global story to it's here. And then within the hour, our phones were going nuts because our stores in certain communities were getting attacked by groups of people going, Armageddon's coming, I need to buy 6 months' supply of everything.
Flour and toilet paper.
Flour and toilet paper and rice and food. And I was being sent videos of people climbing the racking and PAK'nSAVEs to get the product off the storage at the top. And my son was working in China at the time. And so I messaged him and said, what, are you seeing or hearing anything? He went on a lot of the particularly Asian community chat apps and things and said, oh no, what's happening is people in China are telling their families in New Zealand that they're going to be locked up for months and they need to get everything they need. So that started it. And it was just a blood rush from there in terms of, you build the business to supply the demand you have in front of you. You might build 10% capacity into it because that might be what happens. We were getting 300% increases. You were just going, how do you physically pump this through? And then all of that time where the rules were uncertain, is it masks, is it not masks? Could people shop here, could not shop here? Can you do e-commerce and delivery? Can you have a service deli or do you have to wrap every product up? So, all of these, and they were coming at us daily. There were just all these moments. And I was thinking about it this morning. A cousin of mine, Paul Little, wrote a book about New Zealand COVID.
Oh, no way, he's your cousin?
Yeah.
Joel Little's dad?
Yes, yeah.
Grammy Award-winning producer.
Yeah, my grandmother's maiden name is Little, so there you go. That's the connection.
He's a great writer, by the way.
Yeah, and he wrote a book called The COVID Chronicles, which was he interviewed a dozen or 18 people every week for just half an hour and told the story of that period of time. And it's actually a real pleasure to have the book, because sometimes you pull it out and go, oh, that's right, that happened, or this happened, because it's such a blur. So there was so many things. It was organising screens in stores. It was how do we keep our people safe? And that clarity thing, we ended up saying there are two things that matter right now. Number one, keep people and customers safe. Number two, have stock on shelf. That's our job. Nothing else is our job.
As I mentioned before, the supply chain just became a phrase that everyone, like with genome sequencing, and there's all these casual contact, all these phrases that came up in that time. Were we ever at risk of running out of toilet paper?
Not ever once. And, one of the things that was incredible, because the story in other communities, there was an issue, because in some countries it's not made. So it's made in other countries and imported. We make toilet paper in New Zealand. Please do not panic about, It does tell you a lot about people's primal fears. That was more scary than running out of food. So
I suppose, and in terms of human psychology, it's an interesting thing. I suppose it's just people looking for something they can control.
Yeah. I remember my wife, I think, saw it. So I was on TV at one point, being interviewed. We tried to sort of get a theme going around #ShopNormal, which is if you come in and take what you need for the week, we'll have it full again when you come in a week. If you take what you need for 4 weeks, we're going to struggle to, So please, shop normal. And I'm on camera on news or something, and as I'm saying this, with the supermarket in the background, a female customer walks past with 2 18-packs of toilet paper. My wife screenshotted that and said, it's not working. I
went to my supermarket. I was like, I suppose I should stockpile, just because everyone else was doing it. And I went in there and I literally didn't know what to buy. I just bought a bunch of baked beans and spaghetti that's still in the pantry now.
And gin.
Before 2020, did Foodstuffs have a pandemic plan?
No, we'd done crisis exercise around earthquakes and floods and fires. They were your natural go-tos. We had never practiced a pandemic, so that and the world hadn't really. So
no, it's unlike anything
you'd
else.
Immediately go to all your contacts and go, "What do you do?" And then everyone's going, "Don't know." And governments, It was, we reflect now and go, would we have done everything the same? Maybe not. But no one knew at the time what to do. And so it made it incredibly fast-paced, incredibly changeable. We got into a rhythm where I would have a call at 9 a.m. every morning with all of our owners, all of our key leaders inside the team. And, there'd be 900 to 1,000 people on this call. And you would just go on and go, right, today, this is where we are in terms of supply, this is where we are in terms of guidance. These are the new rules that have come in the last 24 hours that you need to execute. And we developed a language, because in a co-op, telling people how to run their store, that's what they are there to do. So we just said, look, we're going to really help you by going, this is mandated. So today, this is the law, could change tomorrow, but we're just trying to help you by being clear. This is recommended, which is we think the best way to go about this is this, but if you know better in your community, you go, you do it.
Yeah.
And it just sped us up so much. Those calls were amazing. We had, hard moments, disagreements, people in a bit of stress and trouble. We also had the funniest moments in the world. There was one guy who would ask questions that you'd already covered 5 or 6 times, and there's always one in every crowd that sort of isn't connected and then comes in late and sort of says something. Had the classic moment where someone else was not off mute and went, for fuck's sake, really loudly. And you've never had 1,000 people laughing on an audio call. It was the stress reliever that everyone needed.
Oh, that's brilliant. Were you getting your job at the time was arguably one of the most important or high pressure or crucial in New Zealand. Were you getting regular phone calls from Dame Jacinda Ardern or Chris Hipkins, who was the COVID minister, or?
Never met or spoken to Jacinda Ardern.
Really?
Yeah.
That's surprising.
Yeah.
Is it?
So, but Chris Farfoy, who was her, sort of commerce engagement, so the key business engagement, fantastic. Regular conversations, listening, engaged, spoke a lot. We were able to go, look, what we need is this, what we need is that. the issues that people probably never understood. So when we had regional lockdowns, we were having trucks stopped at borders saying you can't go through. And you're going, guys, it's a big yellow truck with PAK'nSAVE on it. It's full of food. It needs to go through. Stories you shouldn't tell, like, South Auckland, your communities like Pukekohe, Drury, staff would live on one side of a border and work on the other side in a store. So we had butchers hidden in boots coming through regional blockades, and you just found ways to do what you needed to do to make sure the store could open full, fresh and friendly and help a community feel normal. So there was some, and then the more important, it's the government departments, the people that are doing the operating, and the police, the ones like that. That's where our connections were a lot. The one thing I don't think anyone maybe remembers, but that whole rule set that said only supermarkets could be open and greengrocers and butchers, and that we constantly said that is not necessary. They could be open. We never argued for only us to be open, never wanted that to be the case, because it just created angst and pressure and an unnecessary thing when they could have perfectly safely traded. So that would be, we had a few conversations with the health leaders, just going, look, we don't think you've got this setting right. You could open these. So that was, it was interesting because, no, we didn't have with the leadership level.
Yeah, it's a wild time. I still can't get over the you not hearing from Jacinda Ardern. Was that a head scratcher for you at the time or now?
Yes, yeah. It is then and now, yeah. And look, I guess everyone chooses where they engage and how. Would it have been valuable? I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Another podcast guest I've had on, Martin Snedden, who was in charge of the 2011 Rugby World Cup, and he talked about how hands-on John Key, but in particular Murray McCully was at the time, and how if he saw Murray's name come up on his phone, like he'd have like a mild panic attack.
And credit
that was a sports tournament. This is a pandemic.
And I was lead on the Telecom project that engaged to deliver the technology for that Rugby World Cup. So a little bit of time with Martin, but a lot with Dame, now who is Dame Therese Walsh, who was, a powerhouse behind that whole event.
Yeah, currently chairman of New Zealand.
Yes.
Chairperson.
Yep. So that was an incredible time, How do you make sure that every global media organisation has got everything they need at every stadium and it works? That was, look, the engagement now, so our police minister, our, education, work safety, all of those things, we're getting good consultation engagement. We're getting heard, not always agreed with, and that's fine. But, I do think in a country like New Zealand, engagement between government and business can be incredibly powerful. Post-COVID, I still catch up with that Stanford class, so, from 2014, so it's 11, 12 years on now. And for a while we were doing circling where someone would come on to a call and everyone would dial in from all over the world and say, look, here's our COVID learning. So they invited me to do a New Zealand one. And I sort of said, look, here's my summary and observation. Number one, it's really helpful to be an island when you've got a pandemic, because you can have a rule set that says we can close some stuff down and protect ourselves.
Natural mode.
Number two, communications are really, really important. And we had very, very strong communicators, including Dame Jacinda Ardern. So you were never unclear about what they were trying to do. You could argue about content and argue about decisions, but you did have strong communication. They were out front and doing it, and that was valuable. And the third thing was, I think culturally, New Zealanders, more than any country in the world, formed one team in a crisis. Like, not everyone agreed, but everyone got on and got it done. You think about one day the Auckland motorways are doing what they do and it's hard to get anywhere. The next day it's empty. That would not happen in an America or a UK or a... so we, those three things differentiated our experience.
I don't know if it would happen here again now.
No, I don't think it would.
I don't know if you'd get the buy-in again.
No, I don't think it would.
From your position during that time, how can you assure your staff that you're talking to on the daily Zooms or Teams meetings, or the staff beneath them, 24,000 people, how can you assure them everything's going to be okay when you don't know yourself? Yeah,
and firstly, be careful about saying everything is going to be okay, because if you're committed to being authentic, then don't say things that What you can do is say, we really care about your safety. Here is everything we are doing to keep you safe. Is there anything on your minds? You can say, these are the decisions we're making to, for our supply chain, this is our essential workers. And so many of them I spoke to who were, a lot of them come from quite large households, so multiple generations family living in a single household. So older people whose health may not be brilliant. And then you've got, a middle age and a young age, and we have the privilege of a lot of families working in our business. there's fathers and sons and daughters and cousins and they're all going back to the same house. And they had this real sense of, if I'm going to work with other people, am I taking something home that is going to harm my grandparents or my parents? You imagine the feeling of that. I was talking to people who were, coming to work, then going home, stripping off their gear and hosing themselves down on the back doorstep, and then maybe sleeping in the caravan. Or, you're going, whilst we are sitting in offices issuing orders, people are living that stuff. So being connected to those audiences, looking after them, making sure, little things like we form priority queues for our teams to get into stores to get the food they needed for their families. Because they were working a 12-hour shift and then lining up for 2 hours to go to the supermarket, you go, come on, we need them back. So, and we need them to have a rest, and we need them to look after themselves. So those, assuring people it's all going to be okay, what you could assure them was, this is what we're doing for you. This is how we're going to try and keep you safe. We hear you on some of the problems. Let's, see if we can deal with those. And just communicating and treating every question respectfully, even though some of them might be the fifth time you've been asked,
And you say there's no such thing as a bad question, but there are some dumb questions. What's, in your opinion, what's changed for better and worse after COVID in terms of the grocery trade?
Look, essential worker, number one, a respect for those people.
Absolutely.
Number two, I think our supply chains, I look at what they executed and managed to do and how they thought about how being efficient as possible, how we thought about, like when you're under pressure, the way, for example, you work today is you might pick 40 different boxes of cereal. Under COVID, we said, we've got time to send a pallet of Weet-Bix. And that's it. And we're going to just make that work. We learnt that you don't need 30 different toilet papers. Like that was, when you think about production and supply chain, what slows down production is stopping and then putting the same toilet paper into a different wrapper with a different brand on it. Or making this one slightly scented yellow and this one slightly scented orange. Or what?
Dolphin embossed.
Yeah, exactly. Or you just go, what people need is stock on shelf. So let's going to make the one in the middle, we're going to make as many as we can. We're not going to offer so many choices. So in many of those sort of products now, you see a tighter story, but it's always in stock. It's, better value. It's those things. One of the biggest trend changes is chilled and frozen food. Because what happened was everyone was told shop once a week, send one person. You can't, fresh food may not last that long. So people started buying fresh and frozen food, which led a lot of our amazing suppliers to go, how do we innovate great product that is great tasting, nutritious, good, but is delivered in those formats? Because it can be. The technology's come a long way. The air fryer rose. People go, I can't go to the pub and have my chips and, nuggets. What can I do? So all these product changes that have happened as a result. And we learnt that, like the serve over deli was a big thing, where you'd go and say like 15 pieces of ham or 20 pieces of luncheon. Now so many people are going, it's bagged, it's ready to go. I know it was packed this morning. I can see the price, which actually is a really good thing when people are managing a budget tightly. There's no worse experience than saying, could you put 5 pieces back? Like, what a demeaning, so you just go, you don't need to. Just have all the bags ready and go, you choose the one that you can do. So a lot of little things came out of it. And we built supply chain capacity. So here in Auckland, we have an 80,000 square metre ambient distribution centre, which is a warehouse, that we could not have got through COVID without that. We started COVID without it, and we could not have got through without it. So we learned heaps of things.
We touched earlier on the retail crime aspect. Has that got worse since COVID? Do you think it's like a COVID hangover in a way?
Yes, it is. Yeah, 100%. So it's society got anxious and restless. It got incomprehensible. There's a great expression that, in general, societies in Albania, so they're brittle, they're anxious, it's non-linear, and it's more sort of interrupted than it's ever been. And so COVID started that really. You think it was a massive interruption. People feared for their jobs and their security. They feared for their their lives. They were forced to work at home, which was unnatural. They got disconnected. So many tragic things happened around, people not being able to be at the right place in terms of family events and all of those things. So the impact, and then education. We have a 3-year set of kids that had a very bumpy education experience, and that's still showing up. So, yes, lots of things happened. What drives retail crime? The most common cause is for profit. It is not. The second most is gangs or organised crime, so they're organising product through a chain, and then the third is addiction. Cost of living or poverty is not a major cause of retail crime. So, then I think a lot of people would think differently. And that's because very often our stores, they know their community. They know the people that might try and steal food to feed a family. And very often they are saying, look, don't do that. Talk to me. What do we need to do? And we've done a lot of things. The problem is not solved at all. I'm not pretending for a second food poverty is solved. But, we have a social supermarket store we're really proud of. We're doing a whole lot of things. But retail crime, it's a crime, and people are not helping themselves by doing it.
And there's a big difference between someone stealing mince to feed their family and someone stealing a 5-pack of Gillette razors, isn't
That's
there?
Right. That's right. Yeah. Or stealing 50 kilos of fillet steak, and going, that is not for feeding a family.
Has that happened?
Oh yes.
How do you steal 50 kilos?
You'd be amazed where you would be amazed and horrified at where it's put. And then you get the conversation of, well, I'll give it back, and you go, no, thank you.
You're right.
Yeah.
Although if someone tries to put a rotisserie chicken down their pants and walk out with it, I reckon let them have it.
It's brave, particularly if it's just come out of the rotisserie. But that is, it's retail crime has always been present, right? We shouldn't pretend it's a brand new thing. It's not a brand new thing. It is higher than it was before COVID. There is no doubt. And it is unfortunately a little more aggressive and more violent. And that's what I really worry about for our teams. There's you look at things like there's a big conversation in society about liquor and sales hours. So a number of councils are now saying, well, the supermarket's open till 10, but we think you should stop selling alcohol at 9 because that restricts availability and will make a difference to alcohol harm. I haven't yet seen the data that says that we'll do that, but the rules are made and we live to the rules. What I do worry about is someone comes in at 10 to 9, they're getting, maybe they're going fishing tomorrow with friends and they want a dozen beers. They finish shopping at 9:05, approach the checkout, and you've got a 16-year-old school kid who's on checkout, and then a big argument breaks out, why can't I buy the beers? That's the not fair bit, because it's nothing to do with the checkout operator. So those are, some of the things that you sort of go, can we think end to end about some of these things and what we're trying to achieve, which is less alcohol harm in society. We're all on board with that.
Surely there's an easy fix, like it just off the top of my head, cover the alcohol up or rope it off at 9 o'clock, and if you've got it before 9 o'clock,
but if you started at 10 to 9, but finised after. So it's the actually sitting down and connecting and going, what's actually happening in a shopper's life? Because they're not thinking about planning to be done by 9. They're just living their lives and doing their thing.
I know you can't speak on behalf of everyone, but how's the mental health of your staff? You must get some feedback. Like they're dealing with a lot.
Yeah, they are. And look, it's I don't think it's more present in our organisation than it is across New Zealand society, but I think it is more of an issue for every organisation. And, we're 100% committed to the safety and well-being of our teams. We talk about a, zero harm environment. We measure in a number of different ways. Our harm is down 25% year on year, and it is industry leading right now. We're very proud of it. And you've got to pay attention. So my worst physical incident happened late last year when one of our Gilmore's truck drivers got out of their truck, went round the back, lowered the tailgate, and at the same time a distracted driver came across 3 lanes and slammed into the back of the truck and hit him. He was in hospital for 10 weeks. His name is Ben, lost 1 leg. Life-changing event. Also the most inspiring 35-year-old I've ever met, because when I caught up with him in hospital, he said, well, the thing I'm trying to work out is, do I do a marathon or a swimming event? Unreal. And you go, mate, whatever. But mental health, look, there's a lot of leadership challenge. There's a lot of pressure. A lot of our families running stores and communities who not only get it from customers, they get it from the community. They're perceived as the supermarket owner, which means, you must be filthy rich rather than you must have millions of dollars of debt. And, the most powerful thing I've ever heard on the subject, and it came from John Kerwin. I was at an event in Fiji that he spoke at, and it was a very funny one because there was 5 experts, then he spoke last. And the experts were very technical and very detailed and sort of, it's Friday night in Fiji and we were having a Fiji Gold and, going, come on, guys. And JK just said, I have no effing idea what these people just said. But all I would say is remember it's an illness, not a weakness. And it's a line that's been incredibly valuable to me in half a dozen conversations with people where you go, so first thing you've got to stop thinking is you're weak. You're not. You if you had a cold or you had whatever, you would go to a doctor and get it sorted. This is no different. It's an illness, get the help. And the other thing I always think about is when you walk past someone and say, how you going? It's a very Kiwi thing to go, fine. Keep walking. And, just having that sense to go, that didn't feel fine. I'm going to go back and ask another question. So just little stuff.
Yeah. What about you personally? How's your mental health been?
It's good. It's good. Yeah. And it's, that's not a no effort thing. You have to look after yourself. You have to be real with yourself. You have to, I'm a little bit of what I try to do, and I'm not perfect at it by any means, but do what you're doing 100%. So if you're at work, be there and don't be feeling guilty about not being somewhere else. If you're, driving cars with mates, do that. And if you're at home or with people, try and do that 100%. Because I think today one of the big challenges is everything being done 50%, which means nothing feels settled. Everything feels a bit restless. So I think that's really important. Try and celebrate what you should, because, and particularly when you get to leadership roles, you're sort of looking around going, why has no one told me I'm good? And it's because they think that's your job, that actually you are the one who's telling people, and, so you have to learn, you get stronger at self-evaluating and going, am I actually proud of that? And if I am, tell yourself. If you go, that's not as good as I could be, then sort it out. And also, I've learned, a lot of the, I get a lot of customer emails, I get a lot of society emails, the name's not hard to work out where the email address is. You can end up taking quite a bit of it personally. And one other thing my dad said, he said, if you pass a drunk in the street and they say you're ugly, are you ugly or are they just drunk? So sometimes you go, look, and I have sent a few replies back to people, they'll say, you guys are this or you're that, and they'll call you all sorts of names, and you just go back and say, look, we're not going to agree. This is our perspective on that issue. And just one thing I want to ask you is, are you okay?
It's funny. When I had Miles Harrell from Frontier on the podcast, he said the same thing. He'll get to work in the morning. There'll be some emails there sent at like 9, 10 o'clock at night from angry farmers, clearly after a couple of whiskies.
Yes.
You just got to be the bigger person. You said something before about people not telling you you're doing a good job because it's your job. But it must be an interesting position for you to be in. Like if you walk through a store and you walk past a staff member without talking to them, like that could play on their mind. Like, Chris hasn't. He's seen me 3 times this week and he hasn't spoken to me. Right?
Yeah. It's that, I call it the 100-1. You're one. There's 100 looking at you, and every action is read as something. So you've got to be aware of it. You've also got to be sometimes. I'm just my mind's somewhere else, or I'm busy on something, and that's okay. But also then take the breather and take the time to walk the floor, go to the store, do the thing. I think for leaders, and this is not a me thing, I see many leaders do this, but one of the things is, how do you personalise in such a large organisation? How do you connect? And the answer is you build systems and processes. So, on a Monday, I send an email to one PAK'nSAVE, one new and one Foursquare saying, you had a great week. And, for these reasons. Did I personally know that or see that? No, but I've got a system that feeds it to me, and it's just one of my jobs on a Monday. It's the only email I get a reply to same day, because, they reply and say, of course, thank God you finally noticed. And then just a system also, little things like, I have the world's worst handwriting. There is a game in the organisation called Guess What the Hell He Wrote. You know, 'cause they
Well,
show
you're like
it.
a doctor.
Yeah, terrible. And they show it to other people to go, do you know any idea what he said here? But there is still a place for a handwritten card, you know, and it's, hey, I heard you got married. I heard you've had a baby. I heard you bought your first house. I don't know those things from conversations. I know it from leaders feeding me it and, you know, having, you know, I call it conducting the orchestra. So when you run a team, you use all of the instruments around you. I'm just one of the instruments that can be used to make someone feel really good.
Mm-hmm. Who do you go to for brutally honest feedback?
I have friends and mentors and people you go to, and you get it at home, and that's really important because it comes back to that I care enough to tell you straight.
Yeah.
You know? So it's important to have people that will do that for you.
And it's important for you to continue to listen to it,
Yeah.
not get too big for your boots.
Yeah. And the other thing is, and that too big for your boots thing is, so I am privileged to have, like the gym crowd in the morning who, mostly don't know what I do, and I love that they don't. In fact, there's a guy who, we encourage to do some gym work who runs one of our DCs, and it's been really good for him. He is world famous in South Auckland. He's a rugby coach at De La Salle and all this sort of stuff. He started coming to the gym. I'd been going for 6 months. No one knew me. No one said hello. He walks in. It's like God's entered. I'm looking at it going, that guy.
Yeah, those exercise classes, I was a member of BFT for a while. They're great, eh? It's a great leveler as well.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and it's just, a community thing. But the other thing, I have a group of mates I do car stuff with, and I have a group occasionally, they meet at a bar in Stonefields on a Friday night. I get there about every 8 weeks, but it is such a grounding thing because they don't care who I am. They're not. There's no sucking up going on there. It's just a bunch of guys who've known each other for a long time. So those things are really important because they keep you grounded. Yeah,
is that sucking up aspect hard for people in the organisation that are below you? You wouldn't know if you could trust someone that they're just being nice and genuine, or
the feedback I get from some people is that I don't notice it enough when it's happening, and I probably, to be honest, it doesn't work. You read a overly salesy person pretty quickly, and you go, look, I'd rather you just, remove the adjectives, just tell me straight what you've got done. Trust me to interpret whether that was a really good thing.
You mentioned this before when you were talking about your 6 week stint at Stanford. You did the San Francisco Marathon, did you say? Yeah. And you've done a few, eh? You've done the New York Marathon for the Catwalk Trust.
Yes, I did. Yeah, which is funny. I saw him last night at a different dinner. Tony Carter, who was CEO at Foodstuffs North Island, two before me. So there was him, then Murray Jordan, then me. And it was his farewell from Foodstuffs, which and Catriona from Catwalk was there, and she came off stage in the chair, and so that's already I'm under threat because how can you say no to that? And she said, I want you to do New York Marathon, and I said, you have to be joking, good joke. She said, no, I want you to do it, and you sort of on that night I said yes, and then the next morning you go, oh my God, what have I done here?
What have I signed up for?
And I think it was less than 12 months from someone who has never run for a sport thing to doing that. And you learned so much during that. You learned that the training is, it's huge commitment and time. You learned that you don't wear white shirts when you're fat because your nipples bleed and you look horrible. You learn, foods and so many things you learn doing that. And you learn about, so competitiveness and, so I had a great guy supporting me as a coach. And you learn that you follow a technique, that it's a science to it. It's not just do the work. We had an incredible fundraising event that turned out to be very connected to Rugby World Cup because the patron of Catwalk is Zara Phillips. And if you remember, there's a little story about her husband playing for the England rugby team and some behaviour issues in Queenstown and stuff, and she came down to New Zealand during the Rugby World Cup to say hello, but she didn't go to see him first. She came to our fundraising event on the night. And where it connects the dots a little bit is a wonderful woman named Marie, who was in my team at Telecom at the time in the Christchurch earthquakes, who was our only injured person. So she is now a tetraplegic in a chair. We brought her up to Auckland. They met. So it was funny how that one commitment to do that run brought a whole lot of things together. And amazing. What a privilege. And I set myself a target for that first marathon and got it. So
what was the target?
Under 4 hours. And
you did it? Sub 4?
3:56.
Mate, that's awesome.
Yeah, so then went on to do San Francisco, which I had not trained for at all, so that was a bit, and Queenstown, which was 2015, and it was the year that it rained for 3 hours and hailed for an hour. It was mind-blowingly horrible, but 4.5 hours, I think, we got it done.
Oh, you're still getting it done. Your Queenstown Marathon, it's very, very misleading, isn't it? You get to the airport and there's murals everywhere saying flat out beautiful. Nothing flat about it, especially around Lake Hayes.
No, that's a fair trading
Terrible. Do you have any political aspirations?
No, not at all.
Not now, not ever? Never say never?
No.
No.
It's funny, I don't know why you get asked that question from time to time, and you just, I worry that in an age of populism, you have to do things that aren't necessarily your position, so, to engage in, and I just can't do that. Having said that, I also have huge respect for the people that do. One of the rules I always have is if you're not prepared to do it, don't criticise. You can't. You can disagree on policy and position and try and engage and partner, but don't criticise something you're not prepared to do.
Yeah.
So and the one thing I would say, from the ones you spend time with them, they work incredibly hard. They genuinely are there for a better New Zealand. They just sometimes hold a different view of how, and that's okay. And we need it, So always respect people who stand up and do it. It's just not me.
I suppose I just asked that because after Sir John Key went from the corporate world into politics, I feel like there's a lot of business leaders that sort of feel like they could do it. He's sort of like paved the way.
Yeah, and I do think it's really valuable to have had business experience or organisational experience. Any career that has been doing one thing for your whole career, that's, can be a challenge. And I think politics is no different.
Yeah.
So I think people who bring real world stuff to it really matters.
When are you at your happiest?
When am I happiest? Look, sometimes it's driving with mates. Sometimes it's, when we're family and, catching up and doing great things. When you've got a son who's travelling a lot and a daughter who lives, so you're getting together only sometimes. Sometimes it's, when you win, like we, when you've had something go well and you're able to celebrate it, So I think, it's about moments and people and experiences.
You've still got a good relationship with your kids? The reason I ask that is, like the careers you've had must come with a huge amount of sacrifice in terms of time at home.
Yeah, they do. And I was very, very lucky that my wife was prepared to be the committed parent, the one that was there all the time for them. Not everyone makes that choice, and very lucky to have that.
Yeah.
And they are great kids, and it's one thing, one of the greatest joys as a parent is when other people say, hey, your son or daughter, is a great person, and as a, and you see them with good friends, and you see them doing things that are meaningful, and you go, this is really cool. And, I really feel for parents of kids who aren't sure what they want to do in the world. That must be the hardest thing, because how do you, you're in that funny hands-on, hands-off situation where you've got to let them carve their own way, but you so desperately want them to end up well. I was very lucky that they were both quite clear and very purposeful. I really hope my daughter doesn't listen to this because she's going to give me such a hard time.
Do you think they'd listen to this? 2 hours of the old man yapping away? Or
probably not.
No. And if she did, why would she give you a hard time?
Oh, because that's her thing.
Right.
We are two alike. We have a relationship that's it's we poke each other, but also whenever something important is going down, she comes straight to me. So, and I always want that to be the case. I think that's one thing I've always tried to do, and I think for any parent is always said it does not matter what the situation is, what you've done, where you are, you can come here, and you'll be loved and safe.
Yeah.
Because man, if they haven't got that, that's a shame.
Yeah.
So that's so important.
So would you say roasting is your love language?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good. It's not for everyone.
I think the last message I got was something in her car. And it's a piece of upholstery or plastic that on the A pillar, and it had come off, and she just sent me a photo saying how to fix. And I went back with how did break.
Some good word economy.
Yeah. And so it's just
When was the last time you cried?
Oh, look, sometimes it can be a movie, sometimes it can be, it's one of the things, so if you've gone through life and you've spoken at funerals of people you loved or people you were close to, and I find it hard to get through, if you've been given the privilege of eulogy, I find it hard to get through that sometimes. And people often ask you, how do I write a good one? Because if you've communicated, just sort of, they think. One thing I did say after a particularly bad couple of years, I said, look, I'm just not available anymore. I don't want to do anymore. But I think one of the things is just say it to yourself several times. I find things sneak up on you. A moment comes through your mind and you go, I'm feeling it. And it's always about people, things, and about, and particularly, when someone told me ages ago, when you lose someone, and it's usually, it's often a tragic or sad, it's a disease that's occurred or a sickness that's occurred. And someone said, we're not sad about what is, because you don't want that person suffering the way they were, or being in a bad situation. It's about, we miss what is not, which is their presence, their time, and so you keep reminding yourself you've had the privilege of their presence.
That's true.
Yeah. No, I do get emotional. Don't love it when you do. You sort of, like most men, you go, I don't do that.
I think, how old are you?
59.
59. Yeah, I'm 53. I feel like it's a generational thing. But I'm getting more emotional as I get into this this era of my life, and I'm here for it too.
Yeah, I think it's the complete set. It'd be a shame not to be.
But it was frowned upon, like when we were coming through the ranks, I guess.
Yeah, I think it just made people uncomfortable. They didn't know what to do next.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have known what to do next with someone. Whereas just saying, "Are you okay?" Arm around the shoulder. That's all it needs.
Yeah. Have you sort of found vulnerability has its place in leadership?
1,000,000%. Yeah. Like the most powerful thing you can do is say, I didn't get that right. Because you can spend a lot of time building your case for why you might have been right, as opposed to just going, I didn't get that right. And that empowers everyone else to be able to say that. And it empowers a better idea. Because if you are going, I'm just going to defend where I was at and never be wrong, that kills innovation, kills everything.
Well, it's almost like a dictatorship at that point, isn't it?
Yeah, just being able to go, okay, fair call.
Yeah. Well, it's like you sort of said at the beginning of the chat, if you're doing media interviews, there's some power in saying, I don't know, or I don't have the answer to that.
And sometimes, not as often, but sometimes we got it wrong. And it's really important. I think it's a key leadership thing to front for the team when you got it wrong and say, we got it wrong, I'm sorry, this is what we're doing to fix that.
What are you most afraid of?
Not winning, not achieving. When you're very achievement driven, not doing that is not comfortable. Yeah, when you're that competitive, how does losing sit with you? Are you able to reframe it as we don't lose, we learn, or any sort of catchphrases? Yeah, you hear that sometimes and go, oh, come on,
It still sucks. Yeah, frame it any way you want. Lipstick on a pig.
That's exactly right. It does still suck. One really important thing is never lose the ability to congratulate the winner. Being the sourpuss, that's not leadership. So, in business that doesn't often happen. I'm not ringing Woolworths to say well done, but the situation. So it's really important to be able to congratulate someone who did better, and then it's and also be able to be okay with not being first. Just do something about it. Or genuinely go, you know what, that was amazing. Whoever that was, they did a really good job.
The next thing I was going to ask you is, what's your best and worst habits? I feel like that last answer you gave may be it. Maybe your best and worst habit is the same thing, that competitive streak.
It can be, yeah, because, I remember when you first start getting that feedback, you go, no, it's achievement orientation. And then you go, hang on a minute, you need to listen and go, what's the bad side of competitive? I listened to some of the other casts. I knew you asked the what's your worst habit story. Mine's FOMO.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
When do you get FOMO?
Oh, it can be anything. It can be a car. It can be a trinket. It can be an event. I would often be told, why do you stack your diary so full? And you go, because I wanted to be there. Whereas being okay to go, you know what, that's fine. Don't need to be at everything. Don't need to take every opportunity. And a little bit in business too, sometimes, there's a great rule that says don't bark at every passing car. Not every opportunity is one we need to do. Sometimes being great at your core day in, day out is the most powerful thing.
Are you good at saying no to things that you don't want to do?
No. So I'm learning to be.
Is that why you're here today?
Yeah, exactly. That is it. No, I'm not as good as I need to be. And more importantly, better at going, you know what, there's a person in my team that would really be great at that. You know, because sometimes you confuse leadership means I need to step up with leadership means I've got an amazing team. What we need to do is put the right person in front of this and they'll grow and develop from it.
Do you have any entrepreneurial ambitions or anything?
Oh, yes. You know, like being on the board at Icehouse for nearly 10 years, you know, you're spending your time in admiration of entrepreneurs. You know, one of the brand things the guys did there was talk about grit, you know, and the grit that it takes to build a business, to start something, to do that. You know, I'm invested in a bunch of startup businesses and things like that. I have a passion for that much more than probably I do for large corporate organisations. Yeah. It's probably why I love what this Foodstuffs co-op is 104 years on. It's just a collection of entrepreneurs running a business. And, you know, huge respect for the people that own our stores that day in, day out are going, you know, they're everything from facing a really angry customer in butchery to dealing with have I got the cash flow right to pay the stock bill. You know, and you know, people don't see all of that stuff because we've had a couple of years of a different story being told. But it is just like any business.
When your time at Foodstuff ends, hopefully on your terms, is it like an All Black coach where you're either you're being fired or you're going to be? Brad Thorne had a quote about coaches. It's like you've been fired or you're going to be fired. Yeah,
you're being fired or you're about to be. That's a really brutal, you know, because you're not just being judged by, you know, that one there. There's one coach. There are lots of observers. There's a nation who are full of opinion. You know, always respect for someone who steps into that role. And you see some of the calmest, bravest leaders in that role because they've got so much and the ability to blinker and go, I'm just going to make this team amazing. That's, you know, look, you know, you always, you know, there's a great saying, which is CEOs serve at the pleasure of the board. And when the board, you know, and I've always said to my chairman, who, you know, we're very blessed to have a great chair. You know, our chairs are always a store owner. So, you know, it's amazing to have someone who's got the ability to govern and govern strongly an organisation like this. I've always said to him, hey, if you reach a day where it's not right, say the word. Because I never want to be in a situation where it's, you know, going through a process. We should be big people who can high five and go, it's been great, we're done. And, you know, I think that's really important. I would like to think I'll call it before they do, because I'd like to think that, you know, I'll go, I know when I've given everything I know how to give to this, and it's a chance for someone else to pick up the energy and run.
You don't want to overstay your welcome at the party.
No.
When you do leave, what do you hope people at Foodstuffs say about you? How would you like to be remembered for this role?
Look, I'd like to, you know, I think authenticity really matters to me. I think heart and, you know, a drive for results and success. An ability to build pride in what the people in that organisation do. They should feel proud of what they do. You know, if there's one thing that makes me sad right now is that we've got a bit of a societal and political conversation that is trying to make them not proud of what they do. And that isn't fair or right. They should be proud of what they do. And I really, you know, we have a purpose that we wrote about 8 years ago. We had 500 people engaged in it, and we basically said our purpose is to make sure New Zealanders get more out of life. So I'd really like to be able to stand back and go, did what Foodstuffs represents in every community through its brands and its stores make people, you know, make sure people got more out of life? You know, I love some of our stories, like, you know, Tamaranui had the supermarket by the railway line and had been there forever. And often this happens in these regional towns, and we try to do the reverse, which is the new stuff goes to a region first. We had to close the store because the site was the site we needed to be on, and you couldn't trade it and build it because we had to knock it over and discover there was a train buried under it and a few other things. And we went, the nearest store is 45 to 50 minutes away. How does this community get what it needs? So the team did a deal with the local college to use their gymnasium for 18 months, and we built a new world inside the gym and operated the store out of there while we built the new store. These are things that only locally owned New Zealand organisations can do. We're, you know, innovative and think about this stuff. those are the things I want to be proud of when you look back, and really proud of the way we served the COVID process. And the other thing I'd like to see happen before I'm done is that we become a national organisation, because it's just right in terms of its benefit for everybody out there. You look at it and go, if Aldi came to New Zealand, would they be asked to be a North and South Island company? There's just no way. So when we say to ourselves, we need to get better value on shelf for customers, what are the big things we can do? That is the biggest thing. So I would love to pull that off.
Is that a big deal? Is it going to be a hard thing to pull off, I mean?
Oh, it's been a very hard thing to pull off. So it's been
Why is it so difficult?
Because there is, we need to do as good a job as we can of communicating why it's the right thing for consumers, why it's the right thing for our suppliers and partners, why it's the right thing for our stakeholders and investors. And there is because there's been a conversation about supermarkets and because there's been so much go on, we went through a process with the Commerce Commission. They declined it 3 times, and we're at the end of that process. We can't ask again. The concern is, will it work for suppliers? Because at the moment a supplier can, sell to North Island, sell to South Island. If there was one, would they be one chance and done? Our view on that is quite different, which is that we have 3 banners. So it's PAK'nSAVE, New World, Foursquare. They make different supplier and ranging decisions. We love that we have little suppliers who might start in one town who are in the New World and grow from there. We have 105 years of that being our story. And, last year we added 114 New Zealand suppliers, and our New Zealand supplier base are growing faster than any other supplier group. So we look at it and go, we're really proud of what we've delivered for that. Merged would be all of those opportunities still there, but also the chance to go, we'd love to win all of New Zealand, and we could do it. So it unlocks hundreds of millions of dollars of cost over a 10-year program, which we could put back into price. So, and we compete. People look at us and go, you're big, and you go, hang on a minute, Woolworths is 8 times our size, New Zealand and Australia. Costco are 50 times our size. So in this industry, I think New Zealanders deserve to have a good New Zealand-owned organisation, and it can compete with the world's best, and that's what's good for consumers. So we need to be the strongest we can be. So that's why, we think it's right. So as we speak right now today, it's in court from the 2nd to 6th of March is the next step. So,
reading between the lines, it sounds like your job's not done at Foodstuffs until this is done.
Look, I wouldn't want that to turn into 20 years. That would be good for no one. What we thought would be the hardest bit about that would be getting the South Island to agree to merge with the North Island. This is Canterbury plays Auckland. That's a 100-year-old social, distance. And we were so proud of, everybody, hundreds of leaders worked to get to a point where when it went to our owners, our members for a vote, 99 and something % of them on both islands voted yes.
Wow.
All right, so we thought that was going to be the real hard bit. Turned out another bit was hard. But that's why we believe in it, because they've all said, we've heard the story, we've seen the argument, we've seen the case, let's get it done. So still love to see it done. It's the right thing to do for our consumers, for our suppliers, and for New Zealand as a whole, because we need to really, these are high capital businesses. Building stores is hundreds of millions of dollars, and so you need scale to get it done.
Yeah.
But New Zealand has co-ops, right? You've mentioned Fonterra, there's us, there's Mitre 10, there's, it's a funny thing. We have more co-ops than most countries. The reason for that is our scale. We are low scale. How do you get scale without having to have every single business have it? You form a co-op. That's why it happened in 1922. And that's why it's time it should be allowed to be national.
Geez, you're passionate about it, aren't you?
Yeah, I am.
I suppose you've got to be.
That's right.
Are you proud of yourself? Not just the career thing, but just the whole package.
I struggle with the word because I don't like arrogance, and that line between pride and arrogance. So if anyone ever said to me, "You're arrogant," I'd be really upset. I try to be proud, so you try to look back and go, hey, it's turned out okay, and that, you've not, I'm probably quicker to think about the things that could have been better rather than the things that were good. And maybe that's just part of a natural drive.
Yeah, part of that competitive gene. When the time comes that you pass away, hopefully many years from now, what 3 words would you like your family and close friends to say about you? I
think, being a good parent and person, and being someone who cared about people. Someone who did okay in life and then used that to do well for others. I think I read an amazing book last summer called Die with Zero. And it was
What is it? Die with Zero?
Die with Zero. And it was a really interesting story of, so how do you plan? And it had a very sobering piece that said go onto these apps and it tells you when roughly you're going to die. Based on, age, health stage, fitness, all
lifestyle
of those
habits.
things. All of that. And you do that and you go, not really sure I wanted that. But, having impact would really matter. I like people to look back and go, there was some stuff he did that turned out good. And that Die with Zero, it talks about, one of the things that really struck home for me was leaving $100,000 in your will to a social interest that you really care about is less powerful than giving them 50 grand now. So it was like, it was saying, for your kids, support them now into a home rather than, when they've got to 40 or 50 and you've passed, So
that altruistic piece that you're talking about, you get to experience, there's that saying, giving is better than receiving. You get to experience the joy of making a difference. Yeah,
and I get the privilege of that for the organisation, and you're always very conscious, that's not my money, that's just I'm part of leading it, so you get part of doing the right things for that point of view. And then do your own things in your personal world. For example, one of the things that's been on our minds is, so where is our place in social license, in our community support? So first rule is we make a living in our community, not off our community. Right, so you think about that and you go, how do I earn the right to be in this community every week? And every one of our owners thinks about that. And then we go, how do we earn the right to be a brand that has a license to operate in New Zealand through what we do? And one of the things, and I learnt it probably most from great organisations like Mainfreight, who, they go, okay, who are our people? There are a lot of blue-collar workforce, a lot of logistics workforce. What matters most is education. So, their big thing is books in schools and how do they get books into the homes and families so that education begins. You look at us, you go, our job is food. It's what we do. Food poverty is always going to exist. So how do we play a role in food poverty? And that's where the social supermarkets idea came from, because it's about dignity and respect, but also getting to what people need. It's how we support all the food banks we do, and so we do the thing we're best at, which is helping to solve that problem. So it's a real privilege. This year we worked with Kindness Collective. They had an amazing store in Otahu that was part supermarket that we made happen and part gift store with toys. And then they brought in people they support that they know, and watching people fill a trolley with gifts for kids that they never would have got another way, and fill another trolley with food that was going to be part of them having somewhat of a Christmas. And you just go, this is an amazing privilege to be able to be here. And I just worked checkout where there was no money involved, but just saying to people, have you got everything you need, and where are you going to be for Christmas, and what are you going to do, and seeing that stuff for real.
This has been a great chat today. Do you know how long it's been?
No idea.
2 1/4.
Right.
2 1/4. It's a long conversation, but it's been great. How is it for you?
Like you said, it's been. It's felt really encouraging and safe and interesting, and you noted when I came in, someone put together a pile of notes which we haven't looked at. It's just been a great conversation. Yeah,
it's awesome. Well, you can't say it, but I'm proud of you, and it's been really nice to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks. And there's something I've learnt, is just to say thanks when someone says something like that.
Yeah. I think that's another Kiwi thing. We're not good at taking compliments,
No. We usually come back with a nah.
Well, I've even noticed my girlfriend did. If someone comments on the clothes she's wearing, she'll say, oh, yeah, I got it on sale. Or, it's like we just can't just sit there and take a compliment.
Yeah, being able to say thank you, I really like it.
Yeah. Well, Chris Quin, I could sit here all day and pick your brains about leadership, but it's been great getting to know the man behind the titles today, and I can't thank you enough for coming on my podcast.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.